The razor scraped against Eliza Morton's scalp with deliberate cruelty, each stroke stealing not just her hair, but her very identity as a woman. "You're coming with me," the rancher would say hours later, finding her broken and bareheaded on that dusty porch. But in this moment, surrounded by her dead husband's family, wielding shears like weapons, Eliza could only wonder if she'd live to see another sunset. Friends, this is a story of unspeakable cruelty and unexpected salvation in the harsh Nevada territory of 1877. Stay with me until the end, and please comment your city below. I'd love to know how far this tale of courage has traveled. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Morton homestead, its golden light a cruel mockery of the darkness that had descended upon Eliza's life just 3 days prior. Thomas Morton lay buried in the family plot behind the house, his body barely cold in the ground, and already the vultures had descended. Not the carrion birds that circled overhead, but his own flesh and blood. Eliza pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of what had been her home for 7 years, her fingers trembling as they clutched the worn fabric of her mourning dress. The black cotton, hastily dyed and still smelling of the mordant, hung loose on her frame. She hadn't eaten since Thomas drew his last labored breath, pneumonia finally claiming him after 2 weeks of fevered struggle. "There she is, the lying witch," Margaret Coldwell's voice cut through the morning air like a rusty blade. Thomas's sister stood at the gate, her thin lips twisted into a smile that held no warmth, only the promise of retribution. Behind her, the 5 Coldwell brothers formed a wall of muscle and malice. Samuel, the eldest with his scarred knuckles and dead eyes. Matthew and Mark, the twins who shared everything including their cruelty. Luke with his nervous laugh that preceded violence. And Benjamin, the youngest but perhaps the most vicious. "I told you yesterday, Margaret," Eliza's voice came out steadier than she felt. "I've done nothing wrong. Speaking to Jack about fixing the fence hardly makes me—" "Silence!" Samuel Coldwell stepped forward, his bulk casting a shadow that swallowed Eliza whole. "You dare speak after what you've done? After the shame you've brought to our family name?" The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire, choking and inescapable. Yesterday she had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with Jack Brennan, the ranch hand who'd worked the neighboring Turner spread. The conversation had been about repairing the fence line that separated the properties, nothing more. But in Margaret Coldwell's poisonous telling, those innocent words had transformed into something sordid, something that justified what they were about to do. "Thomas trusted you," Margaret hissed, producing a pair of sheep shears from behind her back. The metal caught the sunlight, sending sharp reflections dancing across Eliza's face. "He married you against our wishes, brought you into our family, and this is how you repay him? Throwing yourself at the first man who looks your way before his body's even settled in the ground? That's not true!" Eliza's voice broke as she pressed harder against the wall, splinters from the weathered wood biting into her palms. "Jack was offering to help with—" Luke's nervous laugh bubbled up, high and unsettling. "Help? Is that what they're calling it now?" "Please!" Eliza's eyes darted between them, searching for even a flicker of humanity in their faces. "You're grieving. We all are. But this isn't right. Thomas wouldn't want—" "Don't you dare speak his name!" Matthew or Mark, she could never tell them apart, lunged forward and grabbed her wrist, yanking her away from the wall. His fingers dug into her skin hard enough to leave bruises that would purple like storm clouds by evening. The other twin seized her other arm, and together they dragged her to the center of the yard. Eliza's feet scraped against the packed earth, her boots leaving parallel lines in the dust like the tracks of a wounded animal being dragged to slaughter. She struggled, but 7 years of marriage to Thomas, 7 years of cooking and cleaning and mending and tending, had left her soft where they were hard, weak where they were strong. "No, please!" The words tore from her throat as Margaret approached with the shears. "This is madness! You can't—" "Can't we?" Samuel's hand clamped down on her shoulder, forcing her to her knees. The impact sent sharp pain shooting up through her legs, and she felt the fabric of her dress tear against the rough ground. "You're nothing now. No husband to protect you. No family of your own to run crying to. Just a widow who couldn't keep her legs closed for even a week." The first cut was the worst. Not because of the physical sensation, though the cold metal against her scalp sent shivers down her spine, but because of what it represented. In that moment, as Margaret grabbed a fistful of Eliza's long auburn hair and positioned the shears at the base, Eliza understood that this was about more than false accusations. This was about power, about possession, about the Coldwells' long-held resentment that Thomas had chosen an orphan from the city over one of the local girls they'd picked for him. The shears closed with a sound like breaking bones. Chunks of hair, still holding the waves she'd carefully set just yesterday for Thomas's funeral, fell around her like autumn leaves. Some caught the wind and danced away across the yard. Others landed on her dress, clinging to the black fabric like copper accusations. "You always thought you were better than us," Margaret muttered as she worked, her movements rough and careless. The shears sometimes caught skin, leaving small cuts that beaded with blood. "With your city ways and your books and your proper speech. Thomas was blinded by that pretty face, but we saw through you from the start." Eliza bit her lip hard enough to taste copper, refusing to give them the satisfaction of her screams. Tears ran down her cheeks, hot and shameful, but she wouldn't beg. Not anymore. They'd already decided her fate. Words would only feed their cruelty. Benjamin, standing watch by the gate, called out, "Someone's coming!" For a brief moment, hope flared in Eliza's chest. Perhaps someone from town, someone who would stop this madness. But Benjamin's next words extinguished that hope like water on a flame. "It's just old Weber passing by. He's not stopping." Indeed, Eliza caught a glimpse of Hermann Weber's wagon rolling past, the elderly German farmer steadfastly looking away. He'd seen what was happening. How could he not? But the Coldwells' reputation for violence kept him moving. No one interfered with Coldwell business, not if they valued their own safety. The shearing continued, methodical and merciless. Margaret worked her way around Eliza's head, leaving nothing but stubble in some places, raw scalp in others where the shears had bitten too deep. Hair stuck to Eliza's tear-wet cheeks, itched against her neck, gathered in the folds of her dress. What had taken years to grow, to tend, to take pride in, was destroyed in minutes. "There," Margaret stepped back, admiring her handiwork with the satisfaction of an artist completing a masterpiece. "Now everyone will see you for what you are, a shameless hussy who couldn't wait for her husband's grave to settle before spreading her legs for another man." Samuel hauled Eliza to her feet, his grip the only thing keeping her upright as her legs threatened to buckle. He spun her around to face the house, her house, the home she'd made with Thomas, where she'd nursed him through his final illness, where she'd held his hand as he died. "You have until sundown," he said, his voice flat and final as a judge passing sentence. "Take what you can carry and get out. If we find you here tomorrow, or if you try to take anything that rightfully belongs to the Coldwell family, well—" He let the threat hang unfinished, but Luke's nervous laugh and the way Matthew and Mark cracked their knuckles filled in the blanks eloquently enough. "The house," Eliza's voice was barely a whisper, "the house belongs to the family now. Thomas may have been fool enough to marry you, but this land, this property, it's Coldwell land. Always has been, always will be." "I have nowhere to go." The words fell from her lips before she could stop them. An admission of vulnerability she immediately regretted. "Should have thought of that before you decided to play the whore," Margaret said, tossing the shears into the dust at Eliza's feet. They landed with a dull thud, hair still clinging to the blades. "Though I hear there are establishments in Carson City that cater to women of your type. Maybe they'll take you in, though even they might have standards about accepting someone who looks like that." The Coldwells laughed, the sound harsh and ugly in the morning air. One by one, they filed out through the gate, but not before Benjamin kicked over the water barrel by the porch, sending precious water spreading across the dusty ground. A final act of casual cruelty. Eliza stood alone in the yard, surrounded by the remnants of her hair. The wind picked up, sending some of the lighter strands dancing away like they were eager to escape the scene of their severing. She raised one trembling hand to her head, feeling the uneven stubble, the sticky spots where blood had dried, the naked vulnerability of her exposed scalp. The sun climbed higher, its heat beginning to beat down mercilessly. Without her hair's protection, her scalp immediately began to burn. She stumbled toward the house, each step an effort of will. Inside, the familiar spaces seemed foreign now, tainted by the knowledge that they were no longer hers. In the bedroom, Thomas's bedroom, their bedroom. She found the small mirror he'd given her as a wedding gift. Her reflection stared back, unrecognizable. The woman in the glass looked hollow, defeated, barely human. Margaret had done her work well. No decent person would look at her now without disgust or pity. Eliza sank onto the bed, the quilt she'd stitched by lamplight still holding the faint scent of Thomas's illness, camphor and sweat, and the peculiar sweetness of impending death. She wanted to curl up in those blankets and disappear, to simply cease existing rather than face what came next. But the Coldwell's warning echoed in her mind. Sundown. She had until sundown. Moving mechanically, she pulled Thomas's old carpet bag from beneath the bed and began to pack. A change of clothes, her other dress, the blue one Thomas had said brought out her eyes. Her mother's Bible, its pages worn soft as cloth from years of handling. The photograph from their wedding day, Thomas looking stern but proud, herself barely visible beneath the veil. A handful of coins hidden in a sock, her entire savings. The silver brush and comb set, useless now but too precious to leave behind. As she packed, she became aware of sounds from outside. Voices, laughter, the clink of bottles. Through the window, she could see the Coldwell brothers had returned, setting themselves up on the porch like sentinels. Or vultures. They were drinking, passing a bottle between them, making sure she knew they were watching, waiting, ready to enforce their deadline with violence if necessary. The house felt like a tomb. Every room held memories that now felt like accusations. The kitchen where she'd cooked countless meals, trying to perfect Margaret's recipe for chicken and dumplings to please Thomas. The parlor where they'd sat in the evenings, him reading the newspaper aloud while she mended clothes. The narrow room they'd hoped would be a nursery, still empty after 7 years of trying, of monthly disappointments, of Thomas's gradually acceptance that perhaps children weren't in God's plan for them. She paused at Thomas's desk, running her fingers over the wood worn smooth by his hands. Inside the top drawer lay his journal, the one he'd written in every evening. She opened it to the last entry, dated 3 days before his death, his handwriting shaky from the fever. "E tends to me without complaint. I chose well, despite what family says. If something happens to me, I pray she finds happiness. She deserves better than the life I've given her." The tears came then, hot and unstoppable. Not the silent tears of her shearing, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She pressed the journal to her chest, feeling the edges of the leather binding dig into her skin through the thin fabric of her dress. "Thomas?" she whispered to the empty room. "What do I do now?" But Thomas was beyond answering, lying in the ground behind the house in a pine box she'd paid for, with the egg money she'd been saving for winter supplies. The practical part of her brain, the part that had survived orphanhood and 7 years of marriage to a man whose family despised her, knew she needed to move. The sun was already past its zenith, beginning its slow descent toward the mountains. She added the journal to her bag, then went to the kitchen for what food she could carry. A loaf of bread, already going stale. Some dried beans, a precious small bag of coffee. Salt. As she gathered these meager supplies, she heard the front door open. "Just checking you're not stealing anything," Luke's voice preceded him into the kitchen. His eyes were glassy from drink, and he swayed slightly in the doorway. "Margaret said to make sure you only take what's yours." "This food was bought with Coldwell money," he interrupted, stepping closer. Too close. She could smell the whiskey on his breath, see the way his eyes traveled over her shorn head with a mixture of disgust and something else, something that made her skin crawl. "Though I suppose we could work out a trade. You're not much to look at now, but in the dark." Eliza grabbed the kitchen knife from the counter, holding it between them with shaking hands. "Get out!" Luke laughed, that nervous, unsettling sound. "Going to stick me, are you? Add murder to your list of sins?" "If I have to." Something in her voice, perhaps the absolute desperation of it, made him step back. "You've got 2 hours," he said, retreating toward the door. "Don't make us come in after you." When he was gone, Eliza set down the knife and noticed her hands were steady now. The worst had already happened. They'd taken her hair, her home, her reputation. What else was there to lose? She finished packing quickly, adding a shawl to cover her head and Thomas's old coat, Too big for her, but warm. The sun was low now, painting the mountains crimson and gold. Through the window, she could see more people had gathered in the yard. Not just the Coldwells, but some of their friends, men who worked the neighboring ranches, come to witness her humiliation. There was no point in delaying further. She picked up the carpet bag, its weight both negligible and enormous, and walked to the door. Every step felt like walking toward a gallows, but she held her head high, or as high as she could manage with the shame burning through her like fever. The men fell silent as she emerged. 20 pairs of eyes tracked her movement across the porch, down the steps, into the yard. Someone whistled, low and mocking. Another man spat tobacco juice that landed near her feet. But she kept walking, focusing on putting one foot in front of the other, on reaching the gate that marked the boundary of the life she'd known. "Look at her," someone muttered, "bald as a plucked chicken. Thomas must be rolling in his grave. Serves her right, putting on airs like she was something special." At the gate, Samuel Coldwell stood blocking her path. For a moment she thought he might not move, might force some final confrontation. But he stepped aside at the last second, though not far enough. She had to brush against him to pass, and his hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "If you try to spread lies about this family," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "if you try to claim anything that's ours, if you so much as show your face in this county again, I'll finish what my sister started. Understand?" Eliza met his eyes, seeing nothing human in their depths. "I understand." He released her, and she walked through the gate. The road stretched ahead, dusty and endless, leading toward town but offering no real destination. She had no family to return to, no friends who would risk the Coldwells' wrath by taking her in. The boarding house would never accept her looking like this, even if she could afford it. Behind her, she heard the men laughing, celebrating their victory over a defenseless widow. Someone had brought out a fiddle, and the scratchy sounds of a tune followed her down the road. They were having a party. They had destroyed her life, and now they were celebrating. The sun touched the mountains, setting them ablaze. Soon it would be dark, and she would be alone on the road with nowhere to go. Wild animals prowled these hills at night, coyotes, mountain lions, and worse, the two-legged predators who might see a lone woman as easy prey. She had made it perhaps a quarter mile from the house when she heard horses approaching from behind. Her blood turned to ice. Had they changed their minds? Decided that exile wasn't enough punishment? She turned, ready to run, though she knew it would be futile. But the rider wasn't a Coldwell. It was an older woman she recognized from town, Mrs. Patterson, who ran the general store with her husband. The woman reined in her horse, looking down at Eliza with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Lord have mercy," Mrs. Patterson breathed, taking in Eliza's appearance. "What have they done to you?" "Please," Eliza started, hope flaring in her chest. "Could you—" "I can't help you," the woman said quickly, glancing back toward the Morton place where the Coldwells' party was growing louder. "You know I can't. They'd burn our store to the ground," but she reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle. "This was meant for the church donation box. It's not much, but—" She tossed the bundle down. It landed in the dust at Eliza's feet, a worn blanket and what looked like a half loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. "There's a shack about 3 miles north near Bone Creek," Mrs. Patterson said, already turning her horse around. "Old trapper's cabin. No one uses it anymore. Roof might still be good." She paused, not quite meeting Eliza's eyes. "I'm sorry. Thomas was a good man. He deserved better." Before Eliza could ask if she meant Thomas deserved a better wife or a better family, Mrs. Patterson spurred her horse and rode away, leaving Eliza alone again with night falling fast. She picked up the bundle, adding it to her carpet bag. 3 miles. She could make 3 miles before full dark if she hurried. The shack wouldn't be much, but it would be shelter. Tomorrow she could figure out what came next. Tomorrow she could decide if there was any point in going on. The road north was less traveled, little more than a deer track in places. Her boots, made for household work, not hiking, began to rub blisters on her heels. The carpet bag grew heavier with each step, its handle cutting into her palm. And her head, her poor naked head, throbbed where the shears had cut too deep and burned where the sun had touched exposed skin. As she walked, she thought about Thomas. Not the Thomas of the last weeks, fevered and rambling, coughing up blood-streaked phlegm, but the Thomas of their early days. He'd been different then, before years of his family's disapproval had worn him down. He'd defended her once, she remembered. The first Christmas after their wedding, when Margaret had made a cutting remark about Eliza's cooking, Thomas had stood up to his sister. "She's my wife," he'd said. "You'll speak to her with respect." But that defiance had faded over the years, eroded by constant pressure, by Margaret's tears and his brother's anger, by the weight of family loyalty that pressed down on him like stones. By the end, he'd barely spoken to her at all, as if ashamed of the choice he'd made, but too stubborn or too tired to unmake it. An owl called from somewhere in the gathering darkness, its lonely sound echoing off the hills. Eliza pulled Thomas's coat tighter around herself, grateful for its warmth even as it carried the smell of him, pipe tobacco and leather and the faint medicinal scent that had clung to him in his final days. She almost missed the shack in the dying light. It sat back from the trail, half hidden by scrub brush and the twisted trunk of a dead pine. As Mrs. Patterson had said, it wasn't much. One room, gaps in the walls where the chinking had fallen out, a door hanging crooked on leather hinges. But the roof looked intact, and that was more than she'd dared hope for. Inside, the floor was dirt, and something scurried away at her entrance, mice or pack rats. An old stove sat in one corner, its pipe leading up through the roof, and a narrow bunk was built against the far wall. Someone had left a pile of wood by the stove, dried and ready for burning. A gift from the previous occupant, or perhaps from God himself if he still remembered she existed. Eliza set down her bag and sank onto the bunk. The ropes supporting the thin mattress creaked alarmingly, but held. Through the gaps in the walls, she could see the last light fading from the sky. Stars began to emerge, brilliant in the clear desert air. She'd made it. She'd survived the day. But as she sat in that cold, dark shack, her scalp throbbing, her feet bleeding, her entire world reduced to what she could carry in a carpet bag, she wondered if survival was enough. The Coldwells had taken everything, her home, her dignity, her very identity as Thomas Morton's widow. She touched her shorn head, feeling the uneven stubble, the dried blood, the nakedness of it. "You're coming with me," a voice would say tomorrow, finding her here broken and alone. But tonight, she had no idea that salvation was riding through the darkness in the form of Daniel Hayes, a man who'd lost his own wife and understood something about grief and injustice. Tonight, she only knew that she'd been stripped of everything that made her who she was, left with nothing but the breath in her lungs and the stubborn beat of her heart that refused, despite everything, to stop. She thought about lighting a fire in the stove but couldn't summon the energy. Instead, she wrapped herself in Mrs. Patterson's donated blanket, lay down on the musty mattress, and stared up at the gaps in the roof where starlight filtered through. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and others answered, their chorus wild and mournful. Eliza closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she started to drift off, she'd feel phantom fingers in her hair, the cold kiss of shears against her scalp, hear Margaret's voice calling her names that burned like brands. She pulled the blanket over her head, trying to block out the world, but the rough wool against her bare scalp was its own reminder of what had been taken from her. The night stretched on, each hour an eternity. Through the thin walls, she heard the desert come alive, the rustle of small creatures, the distant cry of hunting birds, the wind moving through the brush like whispered secrets. And beyond all that, silence, the terrible, complete silence of being utterly alone in the world. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to the sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she sat up, instantly alert. Had the Coldwells changed their minds? Decided that exile wasn't enough? The sound grew closer, and she could hear voices now, men's voices, rough with drink and excitement. But they passed by, the thunder of hooves fading into the distance. Not looking for her then, just riders in the night, headed toward town or away from it, living their lives untouched by the tragedy that had befallen her. She lay back down, pulling the blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow she would have to decide what to do. She had enough food for maybe 3 days if she was careful. The coins in her sock might buy a few supplies, but not enough to start over. And looking like she did, no respectable establishment would hire her. The Coldwells had made sure of that. They'd marked her as surely as if they'd branded her with an iron. The thought of ending it all crossed her mind, floating through the darkness like a moth-seeking flame. It would be easy enough. The desert was full of ways to die: exposure, thirst, a fall from a cliff, or simply walking until her body gave out. Thomas was gone. Her life was destroyed. What was there to keep going for? But even as the thought formed, something in her rebelled against it. Maybe it was the stubborn streak that had helped her survive the orphanage. Maybe it was anger, pure and simple, at the injustice of it all. Or maybe it was just the animal instinct to keep breathing, keep fighting, keep living even when life seemed worthless. She thought about Jack Brennan, the ranch hand whose innocent conversation had been twisted into something shameful. He'd only been trying to help, offering to fix the fence in exchange for some of her preserves. He'd been respectful, keeping a proper distance, touching his hat brim when he spoke to her. The Coldwells had turned that simple kindness into something ugly, using it as an excuse to destroy her. But they hadn't needed an excuse. Not really. They'd been waiting for this opportunity since the day Thomas brought her home as his bride. Every family dinner had been a trial, every holiday a test she was destined to fail. Margaret never missed a chance to remind her that she wasn't good enough, that Thomas had married beneath himself, that a city orphan could never truly be part of their family, and now they'd won. Thomas was dead, and they'd driven her out like a diseased animal. Tomorrow they'd probably divide up the house's contents, Margaret taking the good dishes, the brothers claiming Thomas's tools and guns. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, would be parceled out among people who hated her. The anger felt better than the despair, so she held on to it, nursing it like a small flame. She imagined their surprise if she somehow survived this, if she found a way to rebuild. It was a fantasy, she knew, but it got her through the darkest hours of the night. Dawn came slowly, gray light seeping through the cracks in the walls. Eliza sat up, her body stiff from the cold and the uncomfortable bunk. Her scalp had developed a layer of scabs overnight, pulling painfully when she moved. She touched her head gingerly, feeling the irregular patches where hair was trying to grow back and the raw places that would scar. She ate a small piece of the bread Mrs. Patterson had given her, saving the rest. There was no water in the shack, but she remembered passing a creek on the way here. That would be her first task, finding water. Then she'd need to figure out her next move. Town was too dangerous. The Coldwells' influence extended throughout the county. She'd have to go farther, maybe to Carson City or even California. But first, water. She stood, wincing as her blistered feet protested, and made her way to the door. The morning was cool, almost cold, and she pulled Thomas's coat tight around her. The landscape looked different in daylight, less threatening but more desolate. Scrub brush and rocks stretched as far as she could see, broken only by the occasional twisted tree. She was studying the horizon, trying to remember which direction the creek lay, when she heard it again. Horses. This time moving slower, more deliberately. Her first instinct was to hide, to barricade herself in the shack and pray they passed by. But there was something different about this approach. A single rider, moving with purpose rather than haste. The horse came into view around a stand of juniper trees, and Eliza's breath caught. The rider was tall, broad-shouldered, sitting his mount with the easy confidence of someone born to the saddle. As he drew closer, she could make out more details. Dark hair streaked with premature silver, a face weathered by sun and wind, eyes the color of sage honey that seemed to take in everything at once. He reined in about 20 feet from the shack, his hands visible and empty of weapons, though she could see the rifle in his saddle scabbard and the revolver at his hip. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, him taking in her shorn head in desperate situation, her trying to decide if he was a threat or salvation. Then he spoke, his voice deep and certain as distant thunder. "You're coming with me." The words hung in the air between them, not a question but a statement of fact. Eliza found her voice, though it came out cracked and uncertain. "I don't know you." "Name's Daniel Hayes. I own the Double H, about 10 miles west of here." He shifted in his saddle, leather creaking. "Heard what the Coldwells did to you yesterday. The whole county's heard by now." Heat flooded her face, shame burning hotter than the sun ever could. Of course everyone knew. The Coldwells would have made sure of that, spreading their version of events in every saloon and store, ensuring she could never show her face again. "Then you know what they're saying about me," she said, lifting her chin with what little pride she had left. "Why would you—" "Because what they're saying is a lie. he interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that made people listen. Jack Brennan works for me now. He told me what really happened. You discussed fixing a fence, nothing more. The relief that flooded through her was so intense her knees nearly buckled. Someone knew the truth. Someone believed her. But years of disappointment had taught her to be wary of hope. Even so, why would you involve yourself? The Coldwells? The Coldwells are cowards and bullies. He swung down from his horse, moving with surprising grace for such a large man. Standing, he was even taller than she'd thought, well over 6 feet. They prey on those who can't fight back. Well, I can fight back. And I'm offering you my protection. I don't understand. You don't know me. Why would you risk— My wife died 2 years ago, he said, the words simple but weighted with grief. Consumption. Toward the end, when she could barely speak, she made me promise something. Said I had to use whatever power and position I had to help those who couldn't help themselves. Said if I didn't, her death would mean nothing. He paused, looking past her toward the mountains. I've been keeping that promise best I can, and when I heard what happened to you yesterday, heard how they shamed you and cast you out with nowhere to go, I knew Sarah would want me to act. I can't pay you, Eliza said, hating how small her voice sounded. I have nothing to offer. I'm not asking for payment. I'm offering you a job if you want it. My housekeeper, Esperanza, she needs help. The ranch has grown and she can't manage everything alone. It's honest work for honest wages, and you'd have a room in the main house, protection, dignity. It sounded too good to be true, which in Eliza's experience meant it probably was. And in return? In return, you work. You help Esperanza, you earn your keep, and you rebuild your life. That's all. She wanted to accept, wanted it desperately, but fear held her back. The Coldwells won't just let this go. If they find out you've taken me in, let me worry about the Coldwells. There was something in his tone, a hardness that suggested Daniel Hayes was not a man to be trifled with. I've dealt with their kind before. He moved closer, slowly, the way someone might approach a spooked horse. This near, she could see the lines around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the way he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd been tested and hadn't broken. I know you don't know me, he said. I know you have no reason to trust me or anyone else right now, but I'm offering you a choice. You can stay here, try to make it on your own with winter coming, and the Coldwells watching for any excuse to finish what they started. Or you can come with me, work for fair wages in a safe place, and prove to everyone who believed their lies that you're exactly who I think you are, a woman who deserves better than what's been done to her. The tears came then, silent and unstoppable. Not tears of grief or shame this time, but something else. Relief, perhaps, or hope, that dangerous emotion she'd thought beaten out of her. I must look terrible, she said, raising a hand to her shorn head. You look like someone who's survived something unsurvivable, he said. That's not terrible. That's remarkable. She made her decision then, quick before fear could change her mind. I'll need to get my things. Take your time. We're in no rush. She went back into the shack, gathering her meager possessions. The carpetbag seemed even smaller now, a pitiful summary of a life. But as she emerged into the morning sun, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not healing, not yet, but the possibility of it. Daniel had remounted his horse and brought forward a second mount, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her forehead. Can you ride? A little. Thomas taught me. The name stuck in her throat. This is Buttercup. She's gentle as they come. She'll take care of you. He helped her mount, his hands respectful and brief, then handed her a canteen. The water was cool and clean, the best thing she'd ever tasted. As she drank, she noticed him pull something from his saddlebag, a wide-brimmed hat. For the sun, he said, offering it to her. Until you don't need it anymore. She took the hat, settling it carefully on her tender scalp. It was too big, clearly his, but it blocked the sun and offered a small measure of dignity. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. The Coldwells might come calling once they hear where you've gone. Let them come, she said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. He smiled then, the first real smile she'd seen from him, and it transformed his face from merely handsome to something more. That's the spirit. Now, let's get you home. Home. The word shouldn't have meant anything. Home was where Thomas lay buried, where the Coldwells had destroyed her life. But as they rode away from the shack, the mountains rising purple and majestic in the distance, Eliza allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, home could be something new. They'd ridden perhaps a mile when the sound of approaching horses made them both tense. Daniel's hand moved to his rifle, and Eliza's heart began to race. But it was just a single rider, moving fast from the direction of town. The rider resolved into Jack Brennan, the young ranch hand whose innocent offer of help had started this nightmare. He pulled up hard, his horse dancing and blowing. "Mr. Hayes," he said, touching his hat brim, then looking at Eliza with obvious distress. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. If I'd known what they'd twisted into—" "It's not your fault," Eliza said, meaning it. "You were only being kind. The Coldwells are in town," Jack said urgently, "drinking at Murphy's, telling anyone who'll listen that they ran off a—" He colored, unable to repeat the words. "They're saying if anyone helps her, they'll answer to them." Daniel's expression didn't change, but Eliza saw his jaw tighten. "Are they now?" "Samuel's saying they'll burn out anyone who takes her in, that she's their family's business to handle." "Jack," Daniel said calmly, "ride back to the ranch. Tell Esperanza we're coming, and to prepare the blue room. Tell Miguel and the boys to be ready for visitors, armed visitors." Jack's eyes widened. "You think they'll come?" "I think Samuel Coldwell is a coward who makes threats he can't back up, but best to be prepared." He glanced at Eliza. "You still want to do this? Last chance to change your mind." She thought about the shack, about trying to survive winter alone, about running forever from the Coldwells' reach. Then she thought about this man who'd come looking for her, who offered not just safety but dignity, who was willing to stand between her and the family that had destroyed her life. "I'm coming with you," she said, echoing his earlier words. They rode on, Jack spurring ahead to warn the ranch. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth, and despite everything, her shorn head, her uncertain future, the threat of the Coldwells' vengeance, Eliza felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness, not yet, but the absence of despair. The Double H Ranch, when it came into view, took her breath away. It sprawled across a valley, the main house solid and welcoming with its wraparound porch and windows that caught the light. Barns and outbuildings spoke of prosperity and good management. Cattle dotted the hillsides, and she could see men working, the rhythms of ranch life continuing despite the drama approaching. As they rode through the main gate, marked with the Double H brand burned into a massive wooden arch, Eliza saw people gathering, ranch hands setting aside their work to watch. A woman in the doorway of the main house, round-faced and maternal, who must be Esperanza. And standing ready, rifles in hand but held casually, several men who looked like they'd seen their share of trouble and weren't afraid of more. "Welcome to the Double H," Daniel said, and something in his tone made it sound like more than just words. Like a promise, like the beginning of something new. But even as hope bloomed in her chest, Eliza could feel the weight of what was coming. The Coldwells wouldn't let this stand. They'd come, bringing their hatred and violence, trying to drag her back into the shame and degradation they'd prepared for her. The difference was, this time she wouldn't be alone. This time, someone would stand with her. And as she dismounted in front of the house, Esperanza bustling forward with kind words and gentle hands, Eliza made a silent vow. She would survive this. She would rebuild. And someday, somehow, she would prove to everyone, including herself, that she deserved the second chance Daniel Hayes was offering. The sun stood at noon, shadows sharp and short, when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. The Coldwells were coming, and this time Eliza Morton would not kneel. The dust cloud grew larger, resolving into 6 riders moving with grim purpose toward the Double H. Eliza stood frozen on the porch, her hand instinctively reaching up to touch the hat Daniel had given her, feeling the tender stubble beneath its brim. The Coldwell brothers rode in formation, Samuel at the lead, their horses' hooves drumming a war beat against the packed earth. Daniel stepped out of the house, having gone inside only moments before. He'd strapped on a second gun belt, and the way he wore them, natural as breathing, told Eliza this wasn't his first confrontation. Behind him, Miguel, his foreman, emerged with 4 other ranch hands. They spread out along the porch, casual but ready. creating a wall of silent solidarity. "Stay behind me," Daniel said quietly to Eliza. "But don't hide. They need to see you're under my protection." The Coldwells reined up just outside what seemed to be an invisible boundary, about 30 feet from the porch. Samuel's eyes found Eliza immediately, his lips curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying across the distance. "The whore found herself a protector. Tell me, Hayes, what's she paying you with? Same currency she was offering Jack Brennan?" Daniel's voice was steady as iron. "Samuel Coldwell, you're on my land. State your business or move along." "Our business is with her." Matthew, or was it Mark, spoke up, pointing at Eliza. "She belongs to us. She's family." "Funny way of treating family," Daniel observed. "Shearing her like a sheep and casting her out. That's Coldwell business," Samuel spat. "None of your concern." "It became my concern when you drove a widow from her rightful home based on lies." Daniel took a single step forward, and somehow that one step carried more threat than if he'd drawn his guns. "Jack Brennan works for me." He told me exactly what conversation passed between him and Mrs. Morton. "You've built your cruelty on fabrication." Luke's nervous laugh rippled through the air. "You taking the word of a ranch hand over family? Everyone knows Jack's sweet on her. He'd say anything." "Careful." Daniel's voice dropped low. "Dangerous. You're calling one of my men a liar. That's something I take personally." Benjamin, the youngest Coldwell, shifted nervously in his saddle. "Mr. Hayes, you don't understand. This woman dishonored our brother's memory. She nursed him through his final illness," Esperanza interrupted, stepping out onto the porch. The older woman's presence was commanding despite her small stature. "I know this because I sent medicines from our stores when I heard Thomas Morton was dying. This woman sat by his bedside for 2 weeks straight, barely sleeping, barely eating. That is not dishonor. That is devotion." Samuel's face darkened. "You don't know what happened after—" "I know exactly what happened," Daniel cut him off. "You waited until Thomas was barely cold in the ground, then manufactured an excuse to steal his property and destroy his widow. You're not here for family honor. You're here because you're thieves and cowards who prey on the defenseless." The silence that followed was electric. Eliza could feel the tension crackling between the two groups of men, violence hovering just beneath the surface like lightning waiting to strike. Samuel's hand drifted toward his gun, but stopped when he noticed how many rifles were trained on him from the porch. "She comes with us," Samuel said finally, "or things get ugly for you, Hayes. You might be big in this valley, but you're not bigger than family justice." "Family justice?" Daniel laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call shaming a woman in her own yard, destroying her life over a lie?" He moved down the porch steps, each footfall deliberate. "Let me explain something to you, Samuel. This woman is now under my employ and protection. That means anyone who threatens her threatens me. And unlike Mrs. Morton, I shoot back. You'd risk everything for some city trash who—" The words were barely out of Matthew's mouth when Daniel moved. Fast as a striking snake, he crossed the distance and yanked Matthew from his saddle. The man hit the ground hard, dust billowing around him, and before he could recover, Daniel had him by the collar. "That's the last time anyone calls her that," Daniel said, his voice carrying clearly. "The next man who speaks ill of Mrs. Morton in my presence will answer for it with more than just a tumble in the dirt." Matthew scrambled to his feet, face red with humiliation and rage. His hand went for his gun, but Miguel's voice stopped him cold. "I wouldn't, amigo. You're covered 6 ways from Sunday." Indeed, every ranch hand had a weapon trained on the Coldwells. The message was clear. This would not be the one-sided persecution they'd enacted at the Morton homestead. Samuel dismounted slowly, deliberately, trying to salvage some authority from the situation. "You're making a mistake, Hayes. This isn't over." "You're right," Daniel said. "It's not over. It won't be over until you return everything you stole from Mrs. Morton, her belongings, her keepsakes, every item in that house that belonged to her or her husband. That property belongs to the Coldwell family. The property Thomas Morton paid for with 7 years of his own sweat, the house he built with his own hands, the belongings he and his wife accumulated through their marriage." Daniel shook his head. "I've sent word to Judge Harriman in Carson City. He'll be very interested to hear about how the Coldwell family is interpreting inheritance law. This was news to everyone, including Eliza. She watched Samuel's face change as he processed this information. Judge Harriman had a reputation for fairness and a particular dislike of families who preyed on widows. "You involved the law?" Samuel's voice was incredulous. "I involved justice," Daniel corrected. "Something you seem unfamiliar with." Luke giggled nervously. "She's still bald as an egg. Everyone in town knows what she is now. No judge is going to—" "What she is," Esperanza said firmly, "is a widow who was assaulted and robbed by her husband's family. What she is a survivor of cruel and unusual punishment that would make decent folks sick to hear about." Eliza found her voice then, stepping out from behind Daniel despite his earlier instruction to stay back. "What I am," she said, her voice stronger than she'd expected, "is no longer afraid of you." The words seemed to shock everyone, including herself. But standing there, surrounded by people willing to defend her, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas's death, perhaps even before. She felt like a person again, not just a victim. Samuel's eyes narrowed as he looked at her. "You always thought you were better than us. Even now, shaved and shamed, you stand there with your chin up like you're something special." "She is something special," Daniel said quietly. "She's someone who maintained her dignity despite your best efforts to strip it from her. That takes a kind of courage you'll never understand." The standoff stretched on, neither side willing to back down. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, and Eliza could feel sweat trickling down her back despite the hat's protection. Then, from the road, came the sound of more horses. Everyone tensed, hands tightening on weapons. But it wasn't reinforcements for the Coldwells. It was Sheriff Dawson from town, accompanied by 2 deputies. The sheriff was an older man, weathered and worn, who'd held his position for 15 years by carefully navigating between the various powerful families in the county. "Gentlemen," he said, dismounting with the careful movements of a man with bad knees, "I heard there might be trouble brewing out here." "No trouble, Sheriff," Samuel said quickly. "Just a family matter." "Family matter?" The sheriff looked at Eliza, taking in her shorn head and the protective formation of Daniel's men around her. "Seems like it's become more than that." "Mrs. Morton is now employed at the Double H," Daniel said. "These men have come here making threats against her and my ranch." The sheriff sighed deeply, the sound of a man who'd hoped to avoid this confrontation. "Samuel, what's your business with Mrs. Morton?" "She dishonored our family. She needs to answer for it." "Answer how? Haven't you done enough?" The sheriff's voice carried surprising censure. "The whole town's talking about what you did yesterday. Shearing a widow like she was livestock. There's justice, and then there's cruelty, and you boys crossed that line." "You're taking her side?" Benjamin asked, incredulous. "I'm not taking any side," the sheriff said carefully, "but I am telling you that Mrs. Morton has broken no laws. She's free to work where she pleases, live where she pleases. And if you boys continue to harass her, that would be breaking the law." Samuel's face had turned an ugly shade of red. "You're forgetting who you're talking to, Dawson. The Coldwell family has influence in this county. And the Hayes Ranch employs half the county," the sheriff interrupted. "You want to start that kind of war? Because I'm telling you now, it won't end well for anyone, least of all you boys." There was wisdom in the sheriff's words. Even Samuel could see that. The Coldwell family had power, but it was the kind built on fear and intimidation. Daniel Hayes had power too, but his was built on respect and economic influence. In a direct confrontation, the outcome was far from certain. "This isn't over," Samuel said again, but the threat sounded hollow now. "Yes, it is," Daniel said firmly. "You'll return Mrs. Morton's belongings, all of them. You'll stop spreading lies about her, and you'll leave her in peace to rebuild her life. Do that, and we'll have no further problem. Continue this vendetta, and I'll make it my personal mission to see you answer for every cruel thing you've done." Samuel mounted his horse with stiff movements, his brothers following suit. But before they rode off, he looked directly at Eliza. "You think you've won something here? You're nothing but a bald whore hiding behind Hayes's guns. When his protection runs out, and it will, we'll be waiting." They rode off in a cloud of dust and wounded pride, but their departure didn't bring the relief Eliza had expected. The threat lingered in the air like smoke from a distant wildfire. Sheriff Dawson lingered, accepting a glass of water from Esperanza. "You've made dangerous enemies today, Dan," he said quietly. "They were already her enemies," Daniel replied. "Now they're mine too. Sometimes that's what justice requires." The sheriff looked at Eliza, really looked at her for the first time. "Ma'am, I'm sorry for what was done to you. It wasn't right. But you should know, the Coldwells don't forget, and they don't forgive. You'll need to be careful." "She'll be protected," Daniel said firmly. "For how long?" the sheriff asked. "You planning to keep armed guards on her forever?" "For as long as it takes for them to understand she's off limits." After the sheriff left, the tension slowly drained from the ranch yard. The hands dispersed back to their duties, though Eliza noticed they kept their weapons closer than before. Esperanza took her arm gently. "Come, mija, let's get you settled properly. You've had enough excitement for one day." The room they'd prepared for her was more than she'd expected, clean and bright, with a window overlooking the mountains. The bed had a proper mattress and clean linens. There was a washstand with a mirror, though Eliza carefully avoided looking at her reflection. A wardrobe stood against one wall, and Esperanza opened it to reveal two simple dresses. "These were my daughters," Esperanza said. "She's married now, living in San Francisco. They should fit you well enough until we can get you some proper clothes." "This is too much," Eliza protested. "I'm supposed to be working for my keep, and you will," Esperanza assured her. "But first you need to heal, both body and spirit. Tomorrow is soon enough to start working." When Esperanza left, Eliza sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden safety and comfort. This morning she'd woken in a shack with nothing but despair for company. Now she had a room, protection, the possibility of a future. It seemed impossible, like a dream she'd wake from at any moment. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Esperanza. But it was Daniel who entered, having to duck slightly under the door frame. He'd removed his gun belts and looked less intimidating, though no less imposing. "I wanted to make sure you were settling in," he said, maintaining a respectful distance by staying near the door. "Mr. Hayes, what you did today was necessary," he finished. "And it's Daniel, please. We're going to be seeing a lot of each other if you're working here." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "Why are you really doing this? It can't just be because of a promise to your late wife." Daniel was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at the mountains. "Sarah died slowly," he said finally. "Consumption takes its time, stealing a person piece by piece. Toward the end, when she could barely breathe, she told me something I'll never forget. She said the world was full of people using their strength to crush those weaker than them. She said if good men didn't stand up to that, if they didn't use their strength to protect instead of harm, then evil would always win." He turned back to Eliza. "What the Coldwells did to you. That's exactly the kind of evil Sarah was talking about. They used their numbers, their cruelty, their position to destroy you because they could, because they thought no one would stop them. But the risk you're taking is worth it," he said simply. "I've been running this ranch for 15 years. I've built something here, something good. But what use is any of it if I can't use it to help someone who needs it?" Eliza felt tears threatening again. "I don't know how to thank you." "Then don't. Just heal. Work when you're ready. Build a new life. That's thanks enough." He turned to go, then paused. "There's something else. I've sent Miguel to town with some of the boys. They're going to the Morton place to retrieve your belongings. The Coldwells won't dare interfere with my men." "But Samuel says a lot of things. Most of them are hot air. He's a bully, and bullies fold when confronted with real strength." Daniel's smile was grim. "Your belongings will be here by nightfall." After he left, Eliza finally looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was a stranger, gaunt, shorn, marked by violence. But in her eyes, she saw something she hadn't expected. Not defeat, but determination. The Coldwells had tried to destroy her, to reduce her to nothing. They'd failed. As the afternoon wore on, Eliza ventured from her room. Esperanza put her to work immediately. Simple tasks like sorting linens and preparing vegetables for dinner. It felt good to have her hands busy, to contribute something to this household that had taken her in. The ranch hands treated her with careful respect, touching their hats when they saw her but not staring at her shorn head. She learned their names: Miguel, The foreman who'd stood with Daniel against the Coldwells, Pete and Johnny, brothers from Texas, old Tom, who wasn't that old but had been at the ranch longest, Chen, who'd come from China to build railroads and stayed to work cattle. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the men Daniel had sent to town returned. They brought a wagon loaded with furniture and boxes, her things from the Morton house. Seeing them was bittersweet. They represented her life with Thomas, now ended, but they were also pieces of herself the Coldwells had tried to steal. Among the items was Thomas's journal, the one she'd packed in her carpet bag, but there were also things she hadn't expected to see again. Her mother's china teapot, the quilt she'd made during her first year of marriage, Thomas's books, even the rocking chair he'd built for the nursery they'd never filled. The Coldwells weren't there, Miguel reported to Daniel, but their hired man was. He said Samuel told him to let us take whatever we wanted, that it was all trash anyway. Their loss, Daniel said. Mrs. Morton, we'll store whatever you don't need in your room. No rush to sort through it all. That evening, dinner was a revelation. The long table in the main house was set for everyone. Daniel at the head, Esperanza at the foot, the ranch hands filling the sides, and Eliza given a place of honor to Daniel's right. The food was simple but plentiful. Beef stew, fresh bread, green beans from Esperanza's garden. Conversation flowed around her, the easy talk of people who worked together and respected each other. No one mentioned her appearance or the confrontation with the Coldwells. They talked about cattle prices and the weather, about Pete's girl in town and Johnny's terrible poker playing. It was so normal it almost made her cry. You'll find we're not formal here, Daniel told her. Everyone who works this ranch eats at this table. We're a kind of family, I suppose, a chosen one. After dinner, Eliza helped Esperanza with the dishes, learning the rhythms of the kitchen. The older woman worked with practiced efficiency, humming softly as she cleaned. You're wondering why he really took you in, Esperanza said suddenly, not looking up from her washing. Eliza started. It's natural to wonder. Men like Daniel, they don't usually involve themselves in other people's troubles. Esperanza dried a plate thoughtfully. But you remind him of someone. His wife? No, not Sarah. She was strong in a different way, like steel, unbending. You're strong like water, finding a way around obstacles, surviving things that should break you. She paused. You remind him of his sister. I didn't know he had a sister. Had. She died young, back in Missouri before he came west. She was married to a man who... Esperanza's face darkened. Well, let's say he wasn't kind. Daniel was barely 16, but he tried to protect her. The man was connected, powerful. No one would help. She died accidentally one night, fell downstairs according to her husband. Eliza's blood ran cold. That's horrible. It broke something in Daniel. Or maybe it forged something. He came west, built this ranch from nothing, and I think he's been waiting all these years for a chance to save someone he couldn't save then. So I'm what? A proxy for his guilt? Esperanza turned to her then, eyes serious. You're a chance for redemption. For him, yes, but also for yourself. Don't mistake his protection for pity. He sees strength in you, even if you can't see it yourself yet. That night, lying in the comfortable bed with clean sheets and a full stomach, Eliza thought about redemption. The Coldwells had tried to mark her as unredeemable, to brand her with shame so deep it could never be washed away. But here, in this house where strangers had become protectors, she began to believe that maybe they were wrong. The next morning brought a new routine. She rose early, helped Esperanza with breakfast for the hands, and began learning the rhythms of ranch life. Her duties were clearly defined: help with cooking, cleaning, mending, the 1,000 small tasks that kept a ranch running smoothly. It was hard work, but honest, and there was satisfaction in seeing immediate results from her labor. 3 days passed in this fashion, and Eliza began to believe they might have seen the last of the Coldwells. Her scalp was healing, a fine fuzz of hair beginning to grow back. She kept her head covered with a scarf Esperanza had given her, but the shame was beginning to fade. Then, on the 4th morning, she woke to the sound of commotion outside. Through her window, she could see riders approaching, not the Coldwells this time, but a group of women from town. Her heart sank as she recognized Margaret Coldwell among them. accompanied by several of the town's most prominent ladies. She dressed quickly and went to find Esperanza, who was already at the door, facing down the delegation of women with her arms crossed. "We're here to speak to the Hayes woman," Margaret was saying, her voice carrying that particularly vicious tone that women reserve for destroying other women. "There's no Hayes woman here," Esperanza replied calmly. "Only Mrs. Morton, who is employed at this ranch." "We have concerns," Mrs. Pemberton, the banker's wife, said. She was a pillar of town society, her opinion carrying weight with the other women, about the propriety of the situation. Daniel appeared from the barn, striding toward the group with purpose. "Ladies," he said, touching his hat, "what brings you to the Double H?" "Mr. Hayes," Mrs. Pemberton began, clearly uncomfortable but determined, "we're concerned about appearances. A single man housing a woman of questionable reputation. There's nothing questionable about Mrs. Morton's reputation except the lies being spread by those who should know better," Daniel interrupted, his voice cold. Margaret smiled, the expression sharp as broken glass. "Come now, Mr. Hayes. Surely you can understand our concern. The whole county is talking. A widow, mere days after her husband's death, living in a bachelor's establishment, living in my employee quarters and working for her keep," Daniel corrected, "with Esperanza as chaperone and a full ranch of hands as witnesses to the complete propriety of the arrangement." "Still," Mrs. Pemberton pressed, "wouldn't it be better for everyone if she were to relocate? Perhaps to California, where she could start fresh without the baggage of what's happened here?" Eliza stepped out onto the porch then, unable to listen any longer without responding. The women gasped at her appearance, the scarf unable to completely hide what had been done to her. "Good," she thought. "Let them see." "What happened to me," she said clearly, "was not baggage. It was assault. It was theft. It was cruelty enacted by people who claim to be good Christians, but who embody nothing of Christ's teachings." "How dare you?" Margaret started. "How dare I?" Eliza stepped forward, and several of the women stepped back. "You shaved my head like I was a criminal. You stole my home. You spread lies about me throughout the county. And now you come here, to the one place that's shown me kindness, trying to drive me out again?" "You're not wanted here," Margaret said flatly. "Not in this county, not anywhere decent people live." "She's wanted here," Daniel said firmly. "On this ranch, she's valued and protected." Mrs. Pemberton looked between them, clearly calculating the social cost of opposing Daniel Hayes. "Mr. Hayes, surely you must see that your reputation, my reputation, can withstand helping a widow in need. Can yours withstand participating in her persecution?" It was a direct challenge, and everyone knew it. The women shifted uncomfortably, several already edging toward their carriages. They'd come expecting to intimidate Eliza into leaving, not to face opposition from one of the county's most powerful ranchers. "You'll regret this," Margaret said to Daniel. "When she shows her true nature, when she brings scandal to your door—" "The only scandal here is what your family did to an innocent woman," Esperanza interjected. "And if you speak one more word against Mrs. Morton, I'll personally ensure every person in this county knows exactly what was done and who did it. Every cruel detail." The threat was effective. While the Coldwells had spread their version of events, the actual details of the shearing had been kept relatively quiet. If Esperanza, respected throughout the county, began telling the true story, opinions might shift. Margaret's face flushed red with rage, but she turned on her heel and marched back to her carriage. The other women followed, though Mrs. Pemberton paused. "Mrs. Morton," she said quietly, "I am sorry for what was done to you. It wasn't Christian." Then she too was gone, leaving dust and tension in their wake. "They'll be back," Eliza said quietly. "Let them come," Daniel replied. "Each time they do, they reveal more of their own ugliness." But that night, Eliza couldn't sleep. The visit from the town women had reminded her that the Coldwells' reach extended far beyond their family. They had allies, influence, the ability to make life difficult in ways that went beyond direct confrontation. She rose and went to the kitchen for water, finding Daniel there, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a ledger. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "I'm bringing trouble to your door. Maybe they're right. Maybe I should leave." "Is that what you want to do?" She thought about it, really thought about it. "No. For the first time since Thomas died, I feel like I might survive this. But I don't want that survival to cost you everything you've built. Daniel closed his ledger and looked at her directly. Do you know what this ranch was when I started? 160 acres of scrubland that nobody wanted. I built it into what it is through determination and refusing to let anyone tell me what was possible. The Coldwells and their allies think they can dictate who deserves help and who doesn't. I've spent 15 years proving people like that wrong. I'm not about to stop now. But why does it matter so much to you? He was quiet for a long moment. Sarah used to say that we're all just walking each other home, that the purpose of strength wasn't to stand alone but to help others stand. When I saw you in that shack, shaved and shamed but not broken, I saw someone still standing despite everything. If I didn't help you continue standing, what would all my strength be worth? The next morning brought yet another test. Jack Brennan arrived at the ranch, his face bearing the marks of a recent fight. Black eye, split lip, knuckles raw and swollen. What happened? Daniel demanded. The Coldwell brothers jumped me in town, said it was a message for you and Mrs. Morton, said next time it wouldn't just be fists. Eliza felt sick. This is my fault. You were just trying to help. No, ma'am, Jack interrupted. This is their fault. They're the ones choosing violence. He looked at Daniel. They're getting desperate, boss. Samuel's been drinking heavy, talking wild. Says he's going to burn the ranch if that's what it takes. Let him try, Miguel said, having arrived in time to hear the threat. We faced worse than the Coldwell boys. But Eliza could see the concern in Daniel's eyes. Defending against a direct attack was one thing. Protecting against arson, ambush, the kind of guerrilla tactics desperate men might employ, that was something else entirely. That afternoon, Daniel made a decision. We're going to town, he announced. All of us. That's not wise, Esperanza protested. Eliza in town with feelings running high. That's exactly why we need to go. They're counting on her hiding, on fear keeping her invisible. We're going to show them they're wrong. So they went, a procession of strength. Daniel and Eliza in the wagon, Esperanza beside them, Miguel and 5 other hands riding escort. It was a statement, clear as any words. Eliza Morton was under the protection of the Double H, and anyone who challenged that would face consequences. The town's main street fell silent as they passed. People stopped their business to stare, some with sympathy, others with judgment, most with simple curiosity. Eliza kept her head high, though her heart hammered in her chest. They stopped at the general store, where Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened at seeing them. Mrs. Morton needs supplies, Daniel said simply, and fabric for new dresses. It was such a normal thing, shopping for fabric, but in the current context it was revolutionary. Daniel was treating her not as a charity case or a shame to be hidden, but as a woman deserving of dignity and normal life. Mrs. Patterson, after a moment's hesitation, began pulling bolts of fabric from the shelves. The blue would suit you, she said quietly to Eliza. And this green. Other customers entered the store, saw who was there, and had to make a choice. Leave in protest or continue their business. Most continued, unwilling to let the Coldwell drama disrupt their own lives. Then Samuel Coldwell entered, clearly drunk despite the early hour. His brothers flanked him, all of them armed. The store fell silent, tension crackling like lightning about to strike. Well, well, Samuel slurred. The whore goes shopping. Tell me, Hayes, does she give you a discount for buying her pretty things? Daniel moved so fast that Samuel barely had time to react. One moment he was standing, sneering. The next, he was pressed against the store counter with Daniel's forearm across his throat. I told you, Daniel said, his voice deadly quiet. What would happen if you spoke ill of her again? Samuel's brothers reached for their guns, but stopped as Miguel and the other hands drew their weapons. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. You're making a mistake, Samuel gasped. The whole town's watching. Good. Let them watch. Let them see what happens to men who abuse widows and spread lies. Sheriff Dawson burst through the door, having been alerted to the brewing trouble. Everyone calm down. Weapons down now. Slowly, carefully, weapons were lowered. Daniel released Samuel, who stumbled back, gasping. He assaulted me, Samuel protested. You all saw it. I saw you provoking a confrontation, the sheriff said tiredly. Same as you've been doing all week. Samuel, you and your brothers get out of here. Cool off before someone gets killed. This isn't over, Samuel said, the phrase becoming his refrain. After they left, the shopping continued with forced normalcy. But Eliza noticed something had shifted. Some of the townspeople were looking at her with less judgment and more sympathy. Seeing the Coldwells' behavior firsthand had opened some eyes. On the ride back to the ranch, Daniel was quiet. Finally, Eliza asked, "Are you regretting taking me in?" "No, I'm regretting not doing more sooner. The Coldwells have been terrorizing people in this county for years, always staying just within the law. Maybe it's time someone stood up to them properly." That night, Eliza found herself unable to settle. The confrontation in the store had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. She went outside, finding a quiet spot on the porch to watch the stars. Daniel found her there. "Mind if I join you?" She nodded, and he settled into the adjacent chair, the wood creaking under his weight. "I've been thinking about Thomas," she said suddenly, "about whether he'd approve of all this." "What do you think?" "I think he'd be grateful someone was protecting me, but I also think he'd be ashamed it was necessary. He should have stood up to his family while he was alive." "Fear makes cowards of many people," Daniel said gently. "It doesn't mean he didn't love you." "How do you know?" "Because you stayed with him through his illness. You don't do that for someone you don't love, and you don't inspire that devotion without giving love in return." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. Then Eliza asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "What happens when this is over? When the Coldwells finally give up or are forced to stop? Do I just stay here forever?" Daniel turned to look at her. "You stay as long as you want, whether that's months or years or longer." There was something in his voice, a possibility unspoken but present. Eliza felt her heart skip, though she wasn't ready to examine why. "I should go in," she said softly. "Good night, Eliza." It was the first time he'd used her given name. She carried the sound of it with her into sleep, a small warmth against the cold reality of her situation. The next few days passed with deceptive calm. Eliza fell deeper into the rhythm of ranch life, finding peace in the routine of work. Her hair was growing back, soft and downy, like a newborn's. Esperanza taught her to make tortillas, the Mexican woman's hands guiding hers through the unfamiliar motions. "You're healing," Esperanza observed one afternoon. "I can see it in how you hold yourself." It was true. The woman who'd cowered in that shack seemed like someone else entirely. This Eliza walked upright, met people's eyes, even laughed occasionally at the hands' jokes during dinner. Then came the night that changed everything. Eliza woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. Fire. She rushed to her window and saw flames licking at the barn, orange tongues reaching toward the star-filled sky. She threw on a wrapper and rushed outside, barefoot despite the cold ground. The entire ranch was already in motion, men forming bucket brigades, horses being led from the burning structure, their terrified whinnies piercing the night air. Daniel stood at the center of it all, directing the firefighting efforts with calm authority despite the chaos around him. "The water barrels," he shouted to Miguel. "Get every barrel, every bucket, anything that holds water." Eliza grabbed a bucket and joined the line without thinking, passing water hand to hand in a desperate race against the spreading flames. The heat was intense, singeing her face even from 20 feet away. Sparks rose into the night sky like demonic fireflies, threatening to catch the roof of the main house if the wind shifted. "There's someone in there!" Chen shouted suddenly, pointing to the loft. "I saw movement!" Without hesitation, Daniel plunged into the burning building. Eliza's heart stopped. The seconds stretched like hours until he emerged, carrying the unconscious form of young Tom, the newest hand who'd been sleeping in the loft. His clothes were singed, his face blackened with smoke, but he was alive. "Keep fighting it," Daniel commanded, going back to the bucket line even as Esperanza tended to Tom. For 2 hours they fought the fire, their hands blistering, their lungs burning from smoke. Just when it seemed the battle was lost, the wind died down and they finally got the upper hand. By dawn, the barn was a blackened skeleton of beams and ash, but they'd saved the other buildings, and more importantly, no one had died. As the sun rose over the devastation, Sheriff Dawson arrived with several deputies. His face was grim as he surveyed the damage. "Arson?" he asked Daniel, though it wasn't really a question. "Without doubt. We found oil-soaked rags at 3 different points around the barn. Any idea who? Everyone knew who, but proving it was another matter. Daniel's jaw tightened. Ideas aren't evidence. The sheriff nodded slowly. I'll investigate, but without witnesses. There was a witness? A small voice said from behind them. Everyone turned to see Jimmy, the young son of a neighboring rancher who sometimes did odd jobs at the Double H. The boy was trembling but determined. I saw them, the Coldwell brothers, all 5 of them. They didn't see me. I was camping out by the creek, fishing. Saw them ride up quiet-like, saw them spread the oil and light it. The sheriff's expression hardened. A small voice said from behind them. Everyone turned to see Jimmy, the young son of a neighboring rancher who sometimes did odd jobs at the Double H. The boy was trembling but determined. I saw them, the Coldwell brothers, all 5 of them. They didn't see me. I was camping out by the creek, fishing. Saw them ride up quiet-like, saw them spread the oil and light it. The sheriff's expression hardened. You'd swear to that in court, son? Jimmy looked at his father, who'd just arrived, having noticed his son missing. The man nodded slowly. Tell the truth, boy. Yes, sir. I'd swear to it. Daniel knelt down to Jimmy's level. You're a brave young man. Thank you. The sheriff turned to his deputies. We're going to round up the Coldwell boys, all of them. But when they got to town, they discovered Samuel Coldwell had anticipated this. He and his brothers had barricaded themselves in the saloon with several armed supporters. What followed was a standoff that would become legend in the county's history. The sheriff stood in the street, calling for their surrender. Samuel appeared at a window, rifle in hand. We didn't do nothing. That boy's lying, probably paid by Hayes to say what he did. Come out and we'll sort it in court, the sheriff called back. Not happening, Dawson. You're in Hayes' pocket like everyone else. Daniel arrived then, along with Miguel and several hands. The street filled with townspeople, drawn by the drama. Eliza had come too, despite Daniel's protests. She stood with Esperanza near the general store, watching the standoff develop. This is what you've brought, Margaret Coldwell suddenly screamed at Eliza from across the street. My brothers are going to die because of your whorish ways. Before anyone could respond, Eliza walked into the middle of the street. The boldness of it shocked everyone into silence. Your brothers are going to jail because they're arsonists, she said clearly, her voice carrying to the crowd. They tried to burn down a barn with a young man sleeping inside. They nearly committed murder. And why? Because I dared to survive their cruelty, because I dared to find protection and kindness after they tried to destroy me. She pulled the scarf from her head, revealing her shorn scalp with its patchy regrowth. Several women in the crowd gasped. Look at me, she continued. Look what they did to a widow 3 days after her husband died. They shaved me like an animal. They stole my home. They spread lies about me throughout this county. And when that wasn't enough, when I dared to keep living, they tried to burn down the ranch that took me in. The crowd murmured, the tide of opinion shifting. Many had heard the stories, but seeing the evidence with their own eyes was different. Samuel Coldwell, Eliza called out. You called me shameless, but I'm not the one hiding behind a gun. I'm not the one who attacked a grieving widow. I'm not the one who tried to burn innocent people in their sleep. Who's shameless now? A shot rang out. For a terrifying moment, Eliza thought she'd been hit, but the bullet had struck the dirt at her feet, a warning shot from Samuel. That was his mistake. Daniel moved like lightning, drawing and firing in one smooth motion. His bullet took the rifle from Samuel's hands, sending it spinning into the room behind him. Before the Coldwells could react, Daniel was at the saloon doors. The next man who points a gun at Mrs. Morton dies, he said, and everyone believed him. Samuel, you just shot at an unarmed woman in front of 50 witnesses. Add that to arson and attempted murder. You're done. The fight went out of the Coldwell brothers then. They'd believed their family name and reputation would protect them, but they'd overplayed their hand. One by one, they filed out of the saloon, hands raised. The sheriff's deputies arrested them with efficient satisfaction. As Samuel passed Eliza, he spat at her feet. This ain't over. Yes, she said quietly. It is. The trial was held 2 weeks later. Judge Harriman came from Carson City, having heard about the case. The Coldwells tried to argue their actions were justified family business, but the judge was having none of it. Assault, theft, arson, attempted murder, he listed. These are not the actions of an aggrieved family, but of criminals. Samuel Coldwell, I sentence you to 10 years hard labor. The rest of you, 5 years each. Margaret Coldwell fainted. The brothers were led away in shackles. Their reign of terror finally ended. As the courtroom cleared, Judge Harriman approached Eliza. Mrs. Morton, what was done to you is unconscionable. While I cannot undo it, I can restore what was taken. The Morton property and all belongings are hereby returned to you, along with damages to be paid from the Coldwell estate. Eliza felt no triumph, only a weary relief. Thank you, Your Honor. Outside the courthouse, Daniel waited with the wagon. How do you feel? Empty, she admitted. I thought justice would feel better. It's not about feeling better. It's about being able to move forward without looking over your shoulder. They rode back to the ranch in comfortable silence. As they crested the hill overlooking the Double H, Eliza made a decision. I want to sell the Morton place, she said. I can't live there again. Too many ghosts. Daniel nodded. That's understandable. What will you do with the money? I thought, if you're amenable, I'd like to invest it in the ranch. Become a partner rather than just an employee. Daniel pulled the wagon to a stop, turning to look at her fully. Eliza, you don't need to. I know I don't need to. But this place, these people, they gave me back my life. I want to be part of building something here, not just hiding from something there. Partners, then, he agreed, offering his hand to shake. She took it, feeling the calluses and strength, the gentleness too. Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than business partners might, but neither acknowledged what passed between them. Not yet. It was too soon, wounds still too raw. The months that followed brought healing in ways Eliza hadn't expected. Her hair grew back, darker than before with threads of silver that caught the light. She learned to ride properly, to rope cattle, to read the weather and the movement of clouds. The ranch hands stopped treating her like fragile glass and began treating her like family. She and Esperanza became close as sisters, sharing stories of their pasts late into the night. Esperanza told her about fleeing Mexico during the Troubles, about losing her husband to bandits, about finding safety and purpose at the Double H. This place, Esperanza said one evening as they prepared dinner together, it collects broken people and makes them whole. Is that what we are? Broken? We were. But broken things, when mended properly, are often stronger than they were before. One evening, 6 months after the fire, Eliza found Daniel alone on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson and gold. She sat beside him, comfortable now with their shared silences. I've been thinking about Sarah, he said unexpectedly. Today would have been her birthday. Tell me about her. So he did, painting a picture of a woman both delicate and fierce, who'd faced her death with grace and courage. As he talked, Eliza understood that he wasn't just mourning his wife, but releasing her, making space for something new. She would have liked you, he finished. Would have admired how you stood in that street and faced down the Coldwells. I was terrified. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. The next morning brought unexpected visitors, a family from back east, their wagon broken down on the road. The man was injured, the woman exhausted, their 3 children hungry and scared. Without hesitation, the ranch took them in. As Eliza helped tend the injured man, she recognized something in the woman's eyes. The same desperation she'd felt in that shack, the same fear that kindness might be withdrawn. She took the woman's hand. You're safe here, she said, for as long as you need. The family stayed a week while the man healed and their wagon was repaired. When they left, the woman pressed a small carved wooden bird into Eliza's hand. You saved us, she said simply. No, Eliza replied, thinking of Daniel finding her in that shack. I'm just passing on what was given to me. This became a pattern. Word spread that the Double H was a place of refuge, and people in need began finding their way there. A widow with children burned out by raiders, a Chinese family fleeing persecution in California, a former slave seeking truly free territory. The ranch grew, not just in land and cattle, but in purpose. One day, Eliza was working with a new mare, a skittish thing that had been abused by her previous owner. The horse shied away from every touch, eyes rolling white with fear. Eliza spent hours just sitting near her, talking softly, offering treats without demanding anything in return. Daniel watched from the fence. "You have a gift with the broken ones." "Takes one to know one," she replied without thinking, then blushed at the admission. "We're all broken somehow," he said. "The lucky ones find places to heal." That night, a storm rolled in from the mountains, fierce and sudden. Lightning split the sky while thunder shook the house. Eliza stood at her window watching nature's violence, remembering another storm, the night Thomas had died. She'd held his hand as rain lashed the windows, felt his life slip away as thunder rolled overhead. A knock at her door interrupted her memories. Daniel stood there, looking concerned. "Just checking you're all right. I know storms can bring back—" "Come in," she interrupted, surprising them both. He entered carefully, maintaining proper distance. But when lightning flashed particularly bright and thunder crashed immediately after, she instinctively moved closer to him. "The night Thomas died," she said quietly, "there was a storm like this. I was alone with him. His family wouldn't come, said the weather was too bad. I held his hand for 6 hours, feeling him fade, begging him not to leave me alone with them. Daniel's hand found hers, warm and steady. You're not alone now." "I know." She looked up at him, seeing her own loneliness reflected in his eyes, but also something more. "Daniel, I know," he said softly, "but there's no rush. We have time." He was right. They had time to heal, to grow, to discover if what was building between them was real or just two lonely people seeking comfort. But standing there with his hand in hers while the storm raged outside, Eliza thought it might be something more, something worth waiting for. A year passed. The seasons turned, each bringing its own challenges and rewards. Eliza's hair grew long enough to pin up properly, though she often wore it loose, no longer ashamed of the silver streaks that marked her survival. The Morton place sold to a young couple from Ohio, and Eliza used the money to buy a partnership stake in the ranch and to build a school for the growing number of children in the valley. She was teaching one afternoon when Daniel appeared in the doorway. The children giggled. They all knew Mr. Hayes was sweet on their teacher, even if the adults pretended not to notice. "Class dismissed early today," Daniel announced, to the children's delight. After they'd run off, Eliza turned to him with mock severity. "You can't just dismiss my class whenever you feel like it." "I can when there's something important to show you." He led her outside where 2 horses waited. "Come on." They rode up into the foothills to a meadow she'd never seen before. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in waves of purple and gold. In the center stood a single oak tree, ancient and magnificent. "This is where I proposed to Sarah," Daniel said, dismounting, "and where I came after she died, to rage and grieve, and eventually to heal." Eliza's heart began to race, understanding where this was heading. "I thought I'd never bring anyone else here," he continued. "Thought it would be a betrayal somehow. But Sarah told me something before she died. She said love isn't diminished by being given again. It multiplies." He took her hands, his own trembling slightly. "Eliza Morton, you came into my life when I thought my heart was closed forever. You've shown me that strength can be gentle, that broken things can be beautiful, that second chances aren't just possible but precious." He dropped to one knee, pulling out a simple gold ring. "I'm not asking you to forget Thomas or the pain you've endured. I'm asking you to build something new with me, on the foundation of everything we've both survived. Will you marry me?" Eliza looked down at this man who'd saved her life in every way that mattered, who'd stood between her and destruction, who'd offered her not just protection, but partnership, respect, and now love. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Daniel. 1,000 times yes." He stood and kissed her, gentle and sure, a promise of all the years to come. When they finally pulled apart, she laughed, touching her hair self-consciously. "When we met, I was bald as an egg and half dead with despair." "When we met," he corrected, "I saw a survivor, a fighter. Someone who refused to let cruelty win." He tucked a strand of her silver-streaked hair behind her ear. "And I was right." They married a month later, the ceremony held at the ranch with the whole valley in attendance. Even Mrs. Pemberton came, having long since abandoned the Coldwell camp. Esperanza stood as Eliza's witness, tears streaming down her weathered face. Jack Brennan stood for Daniel, proud to support the man who'd defended him. As they exchanged vows under the vast Nevada sky, Eliza thought about the journey that had brought her here. From that terrible morning when the Coldwells had shorn her like a sheep, through the despair of that lonely shack, to this moment of joy and promise. The woman who'd cowered before her in-law's cruelty now stood tall, surrounded by people who valued her, married to a man who saw her strength, not her shame. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Daniel did, to the cheers of everyone assembled. That night, as the celebration continued with music and dancing, Margaret Coldwell appeared at the ranch gate. She was alone, aged 10 years in the tooth since her brother's imprisonment. The music stopped as people noticed her. Eliza walked toward her, Daniel at her side. "Margaret, I came to—" The woman struggled with words that clearly tasted bitter. "I came to apologize, not for their sake. They made their choices. But for mine. What I did to you was wrong, cruel, unchristian." Eliza studied her former tormentor, seeing not the powerful matriarch who terrorized her, but a broken woman facing her own shame. "I forgive you," Eliza said simply. "Not for you, but for me. Carrying hatred is too heavy a burden." Margaret nodded, tears falling silently, then turned and walked away. She would leave the county soon after, unable to bear the weight of her family's disgrace. As the celebration resumed, Daniel pulled Eliza aside. "That was generous of you." "Generosity is something I learned from you," she replied. "From this place. From everyone who chose to see me as more than what was done to me." They danced then, under stars that seemed to shine with approval. The other couples joined them, Esperanza with Miguel, who'd been quietly courting her for months, Jack Brennan with his new bride from town, the ranch hands with local girls who'd come for the celebration. Old Tom, slightly drunk and wholly sentimental, raised his glass in a toast. To second chances and the courage to take them. Everyone cheered and drank, but Eliza barely heard them. She was lost in Daniel's eyes, in the solid warmth of his arms around her, in the miracle of being loved after believing she was unlovable. Later, much later, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, Daniel said, "I have a wedding gift for you." He handed her a deed. She read it by lamplight, gasping when she understood. "Daniel, this is half ownership of the entire ranch. Not a partnership, true equality. What's mine is yours, in law as well as love. But your investors, the other ranchers, will accept it or find someone else to do business with." His voice was firm. "You're not just my wife, Eliza. You're my partner in everything. The ranch has thrived since you arrived. The school, the families we've helped settle, the new contracts with the Army, that's all grown from seeds you planted." She kissed him then, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. When they parted, she said, "I have a gift for you too, though it won't arrive for about 7 months." It took him a moment to understand, then his face lit with joy. "Truly?" "Truly." Esperanza confirmed it yesterday. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around as she laughed. "A child. Our child. After all those years with Thomas when it never happened, I thought I couldn't. But Esperanza says sometimes the body waits for the right moment, the right person." They went inside, to their room, to their bed, to begin this new chapter of their intertwined lives. Outside, the celebration continued, but for Eliza and Daniel, the rest of the world had faded away. In the months that followed, Eliza's pregnancy progressed smoothly. The ranch thrived under their joint management, becoming known throughout Nevada as a place of opportunity and second chances. The school grew, adding a second teacher. The families they'd helped settle formed a tight-knit community, supporting each other through hardships and celebrating successes together. When labor came, it was long and difficult. Daniel paced the hallway like a caged mountain cat, while Esperanza and the midwife tended to Eliza. Her screams tore at him, each one a reminder of how Sarah had suffered at the end, though from different causes. But then, as dawn broke over the mountains, a different cry filled the air, the strong, healthy wail of a newborn. Daniel was allowed in to find Eliza exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle. "Your son," she said, offering the baby to him. Daniel took the child with infinite care, marveling at the tiny fingers, the shock of dark hair, the unfocused eyes that would soon learn to see the world. What shall we name him? Eliza had thought about this. Thomas Daniel Hayes, for the past that shaped us and the future we're building. Perfect, Daniel agreed, though privately he thought the boy would probably go by Tom or Danny to avoid confusion. As she watched her husband hold their son, Eliza reflected on the strange paths life took. 2 years ago she'd been shaved and shamed, cast out with nothing but despair for company. Now she was wife, mother, partner in a thriving ranch, pillar of a growing community. The Coldwells had tried to destroy her, to reduce her to nothing. Instead, their cruelty had led her to this, to love, to purpose, to a life richer than anything she'd dreamed. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, sitting beside her on the bed, still cradling their son. "I'm thinking about the woman you found in that shack, wondering what she'd say if she could see this. She'd say she was stronger than she knew, that she deserved every bit of happiness she found." "No," Eliza corrected softly. "She'd say thank you for seeing something in her worth saving." "You saved yourself," Daniel insisted. "I just offered a hand up." Their son made a small sound, not quite a cry, more an announcement of presence. They both looked down at him, this tiny person who would grow up knowing only that his mother was strong, his father was kind, and that second chances were always possible. Years later, when young Thomas asked about the silver streaks in his mother's hair, she would tell him they were marks of honor, earned through surviving something that should have broken her. When he asked about the burn scars on the old barn's foundation, his father would tell him about the night evil came calling and good people stood against it. But those stories were for the future. Now, in this moment, Eliza simply held her family close and marveled at the journey that had brought her here. The rancher had indeed said she was coming with him that day at the shack, and she had. But what she'd really been moving toward was this love, this life, this proof that shame could be transformed into strength, that cruelty could be answered with kindness, and that sometimes, just sometimes, broken people could build something beautiful from their pieces. The sun rose fully, bathing the room in golden light. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed and ranch hands called to each other, beginning another day's work. The Double H Ranch was waking up, strong and prosperous, a testament to what could be built when people chose compassion over cruelty, courage over fear. Eliza closed her eyes, feeling Daniel's solid presence beside her, their son's warm weight in her arms. She'd been coming with him since that first day, but only now did she understand that the destination had never been a place. It had been this feeling of being wholly, completely, finally home. The years that followed young Thomas's birth brought both prosperity and challenge to the Double H Ranch. The child grew strong and curious, toddling after his father through the barns and climbing into his mother's lap during her evening lessons at the school. His presence seemed to complete something in the ranch's spirit, as if the land itself had been waiting for this next generation. But peace, Eliza had learned, was often temporary in the Nevada territory. It started with small things. Cattle found dead at the far edges of their property, shot clean through. Fences cut in the night. Water sources fouled with dead animals. Daniel increased patrols, but whoever was doing it knew the land well, striking and vanishing like smoke. Then came the letter. Eliza found it nailed to their front door one morning, the paper yellowed and the handwriting familiar enough to make her blood run cold. She read it twice before carrying it to Daniel, who was working with Miguel on breaking a new horse. "It's from Samuel," she said quietly, handing him the paper. Daniel read aloud. "Did you think prison walls could hold a Coldwell forever? Did you think your whore's testimony could keep me caged? I'm coming for what's mine, the land, the reputation, the justice you stole. And this time I'll take everything you love before I take you." Miguel swore in Spanish. "When did he get out?" "His sentence was 10 years, Daniel calculated. It's only been 3. "Early release," Sheriff Dawson confirmed when they rode to town that afternoon. "Good behavior, overcrowding, and a judge who owed the Coldwell family old favors. Samuel got out 2 weeks ago. His brothers are still inside, but Samuel's free." "And the law?" Daniel asked. "Can't do anything until he actually commits a crime. Threats and a letter aren't enough, especially when we can't prove he wrote it." Eliza felt the old fear creeping back, the sensation of being hunted. But this time it was different. This time she had something to lose beyond her own life. She had Thomas, barely 3 years old, innocent and vulnerable. She had Daniel, the ranch, the community they'd built. "We'll be ready," Daniel said firmly. "Let him come." But Samuel Coldwell had learned from his previous failures. He didn't come charging in with guns blazing. Instead, he began a campaign of psychological warfare that tested everyone's nerves. Ranch hands quit without explanation, only for Eliza to learn later that they'd been threatened or bribed. Supplies ordered from town mysteriously failed to arrive. Rumors began circulating that the Double H was failing, that Daniel had overextended his credit, that the ranch would be up for sale soon. "He's trying to isolate us," Daniel said one evening as they reviewed their dwindling resources. "Make us weak before he strikes." "It's working," Eliza admitted, looking at their ledgers. "We've lost 3 contracts this month. People are afraid to do business with us." Young Thomas played at their feet, building towers with wooden blocks, blissfully unaware of the danger circling their family. Eliza watched him, her heart aching with fierce protective love. "Maybe I should leave," she said suddenly. "Take Thomas and go to California. It's me Samuel wants. If I'm gone—" "Don't." Daniel's voice was sharp. "Don't even think it. We don't run. We don't abandon what we've built." "But Thomas will grow up knowing his parents stood against evil and won." He pulled her close. "Samuel Coldwell doesn't get to drive you away again. Never again." The first direct attack came a week later. Eliza was at the schoolhouse teaching the morning lessons when she heard the children scream. She ran outside to find Samuel Coldwell sitting on his horse in the schoolyard, just watching. He'd changed in prison, grown thinner and harder, his eyes holding a cold madness that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Eliza," he said conversationally, as if they were old friends meeting by chance. "You're looking well. Prison food must agree with you less than marriage to a rich man agrees with you." "Get off this property," she said, moving to put herself between him and the children. "Public property, isn't it? The school belongs to the town." He smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Heard you have a son now, little Thomas, named after my brother. How touching." The threat in his voice was unmistakable. Eliza's hand went to the small pistol Daniel had insisted she carry, hidden in her skirts. "If you come near my son—" "What? You'll shoot me? In front of all these children?" He laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "You always were dramatic. Shaving your head wasn't enough of a lesson, apparently." Jack Brennan appeared then, rifle in hand, accompanied by 2 other ranch hands. They'd been watching the school since Samuel's release, though Eliza hadn't known it until now. "Time to move along, Coldwell," Jack said steadily. Samuel looked at the armed men and shrugged. "Just paying a social call. No law against that." He touched his hat mockingly to Eliza. "Give my regards to your husband. Tell him I'll be seeing him soon." After he rode off, Eliza's hands shook so badly she had to dismiss school early. Jack escorted her back to the ranch, where she found Daniel already aware of the encounter. "That's it," he said. "You and Thomas are going to stay in the house. No more teaching until this is resolved." "I won't be a prisoner in my own home," Eliza protested. "Better a temporary prisoner than a permanent victim." His voice softened. "Please, Eliza. I can't protect you if I don't know where you are." And she agreed reluctantly, and for 2 weeks, an uneasy quiet settled over the ranch. Guards were posted, patrols increased. Everyone waited for Samuel to make his move. It came on a moonless night, swift and brutal. Eliza woke to the sound of gunfire and Daniel leaping from their bed, already reaching for his weapons. "Stay here," he commanded. "Bar the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Miguel." He was gone before she could protest. More gunshots echoed across the ranch, accompanied by shouts and the thunder of horses. Eliza grabbed her own rifle and took position by the window, her heart pounding. Young Thomas stirred in his crib in the corner of their room. They'd moved him there for safety. "Mama?" he called sleepily. "Shh, sweetheart. Just some noise outside. Go back to sleep." But the battle outside was escalating. She could see muzzle flashes in the darkness, hear Daniel's voice shouting orders. Then, terrifyingly, she heard something else, the crackling of fire. They were trying to burn the ranch again. A crash came from downstairs. Someone had broken through a window. Eliza heard boots on the stairs, measured and deliberate. She aimed her rifle at the door, trying to steady her breathing. "Eliza," Samuel's voice came through the wood, almost gentle. "Open the door. We have unfinished business." "Go to hell, Samuel." Such language from a lady. What would Thomas think? The first Thomas, I mean. My brother. The one you dishonored. I never dishonored him. I loved him, stayed with him, held him while he died. You're the one who dishonored his memory. The door handle rattled. Then came the sound of something hitting the door. An axe, she realized with terror. He was chopping his way in. Thomas started crying, frightened by the noise. The sound seemed to drive Samuel into a frenzy. The axe blows came faster, wood splintering with each impact. Eliza made a decision. She grabbed Thomas from his crib, opened the window, and climbed out onto the porch roof. The battle still raged below, but she had to get her son to safety. "Mama's scared," Thomas whimpered, clinging to her neck. "Mama's here," she whispered. "We're going on an adventure." She made her way across the roof to where it connected with the barn, the new barn, built after the fire. Just as she reached it, she heard Samuel crash through the bedroom door behind them. "Running again, Eliza?" he called. "Just like that day at your house? But there's nowhere to run now." She slipped through the barn's loft window. Thomas clutched against her chest. The hay provided some cover, but she could hear Samuel following, his boots heavy on the roof. Down below, the battle was turning. She could see Daniel and Miguel driving back the attackers, hired guns, not the other Coldwell brothers who were still in prison. But they didn't know Samuel was up here with her. "Found you," Samuel said, appearing at the loft window. Eliza raised her rifle with one arm, the other holding Thomas. "Stay back." "You won't shoot, not while holding the boy. You might drop him." He climbed through the window, confident in her disadvantage. But Eliza had learned something in the years since he'd shaved her in that dusty yard. She'd learned that sometimes survival required doing the impossible. She set Thomas down in the hay, whispered, "Stay here, baby," and faced Samuel fully. "There you are," he said with satisfaction. "The real you. Not the lady of the manor you've been pretending to be, but the scared little nobody who thought she could marry into the Coldwell family." "I'm not scared anymore," Eliza said, and found it was true. "I'm angry. You took everything from me once. You tried to break me, but all you did was show me how strong I could be." "Strong?" He laughed bitterly. "You were nothing, a bald, pathetic creature crying in the dirt. I made you nothing." "No," she said firmly. "You freed me. From the Coldwells, from fear, from the small life I'd been living. Every cruel thing you did led me here, to Daniel, to this ranch, to my son, to a life bigger and better than anything you could imagine." His face contorted with rage. "You should have disappeared. Should have had the decency to vanish after what you did to my family." "What I did? I existed, Samuel. I married your brother and loved him and stayed with him until the end. My only crime was not being the woman you wanted him to marry." Samuel pulled out a knife, the blade gleaming even in the dim light. "Doesn't matter now. You're going to disappear tonight, one way or another, but first, I think you need another lesson in humility. Maybe I'll start with that pretty hair that's grown back." He lunged at her, faster than she expected. She fired the rifle, but he knocked it aside, the bullet going wild. They grappled, Eliza fighting with desperate strength. The knife slashed close to her face, catching her shoulder instead, sending hot pain down her arm. Thomas screamed from his hiding spot in the hay. The sound distracted Samuel for just a moment, but it was enough. Eliza grabbed a pitchfork leaning against the wall and swung it with all her might. The handle caught Samuel across the temple, sending him staggering backward toward the loft's open edge. He teetered there for a moment, arms windmilling, hatred and surprise warring in his eyes. Then he fell, crashing to the barn floor 20 feet below with a sound that made Eliza's stomach turn. "Eliza!" Daniel's voice came from below, followed by his boots on the ladder. He emerged into the loft to find her standing there, blood seeping from her shoulder, pitchfork still in her hands. Thomas ran to his father, crying, "Papa, bad man, bad man!" Daniel scooped up his son with one arm and pulled Eliza close with the other. "Are you hurt?" "Just my shoulder. Samuel, I know. I saw him fall, kissed her forehead. It's over. It's finally over. They climbed down to find Samuel Coldwell unconscious but breathing, his leg bent at an unnatural angle. Sheriff Dawson, who'd arrived with reinforcements, looked down at him with disgust. He'll live to stand trial, the sheriff said. This time, no early release. Attempted murder, breaking and entering, assault. He'll be lucky if he ever sees freedom again. As the doctor tended to Eliza's shoulder, she watched them load Samuel into a wagon. He'd regained consciousness and caught her eye. She expected to see hatred there, but instead found something else. Defeat, complete and final. You won, he said weakly. No, she replied. I survived. There's a difference. The trials that followed were swift. Samuel's hired guns testified against him in exchange for lighter sentences. The attack on the ranch, the attempted murder of Eliza and threat to young Thomas, it was all laid bare. This time, the judge showed no leniency. Samuel Coldwell would spend the rest of his life in prison. Margaret Coldwell, who'd returned for the trial, approached Eliza afterward. She looked older, worn down by the weight of her family's sins. I came to ask you something, Margaret said quietly. My brothers, all of them, they're lost to their own hatred. But I have nieces and nephews, Samuel's children, who are suffering for their father's crimes. They're hungry, ostracized, punished for something they didn't do. Eliza studied the woman who'd wielded those shears, who'd taken such pleasure in her humiliation. But she also thought of those children, innocent as her own Thomas. What are you asking? For mercy, for help, for the kind of compassion I denied you. It would have been easy to refuse, to let the Coldwell name die in poverty and shame. But Eliza thought of Daniel's words about walking each other home, about strength being meant for protection, not punishment. Send them to the school, she said finally. They can take meals at the ranch. We'll see they don't go hungry. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. After everything, children aren't responsible for their parents' sins. I won't let them suffer for what Samuel did. Word of this mercy spread through the county, cementing Eliza's reputation not as the shamed widow the Coldwells had tried to create, but as a woman of uncommon grace and strength. The ranch prospered in the years that followed. Young Thomas grew tall and strong, with his father's steady nature and his mother's compassion. More children followed, Sarah, named for Daniel's first wife, and James, who had Eliza's auburn hair and stubborn streak. The school expanded into a proper academy, drawing students from 3 counties. The community around the Double H grew into a small town, with Eliza serving as its unofficial matriarch, the woman everyone turned to in times of trouble. On the 5th anniversary of Samuel's final attack, Daniel found Eliza standing in the barn loft where she'd made her stand. She often came here when she needed to think, to remember. Regrets? He asked, joining her at the window overlooking their land. No, she said, leaning into his warmth. Just remembering. That woman you found in the shack. Sometimes I can barely remember being her. She's still in there, Daniel said gently. That survivor. She's just not alone anymore. They stood together, watching the sun set over their empire built on second chances. The Double H had become more than just a ranch. It was a symbol of what could rise from ashes, what could grow from cruelty, what love could build when given the chance to flourish. That evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Thomas asked a question that had apparently been bothering him. Mama, why do some of your hair have silver in them? Eliza touched the streaks that had never faded, that marked her like badges of honor. They're reminders, sweetheart. Of what? She looked around the table, at Daniel, strong and steady, at Esperanza, who'd become the grandmother her children needed, at Miguel and the hands who'd become family, at her children born from love rather than duty. They remind me that the hardest roads often lead to the most beautiful destinations. Young Thomas seemed to consider this with the seriousness children brought to important matters. Like when we got lost that time and found the meadow with all the flowers? Exactly like that, Eliza said, ruffling his hair. Later, after the children were asleep, Eliza and Daniel sat on their porch, the same porch where she'd first arrived, bald and broken, carrying nothing but despair. Now it was hung with flowering vines she'd planted, furnished with comfortable chairs they'd chosen together, filled with the quiet contentment of a life well lived. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, "about expanding further west. There's good land available, and with the railroad coming through—" "Always planning," Eliza teased. "Always building." "We both are. It's what we do. Build things that last." She thought about that, about the permanence they'd created from such temporary pain. The Coldwells had tried to destroy her, to reduce her to nothing but shame and fear. Instead, they'd inadvertently set her on a path to something greater than she'd ever imagined. "Do you think Thomas would have been happy?" she asked suddenly. "My first husband. Do you think he'd be happy seeing what became of me?" Daniel considered carefully. "I think he'd be grateful you found happiness. From what you've told me, he loved you in his way, even if he couldn't protect you. He'd want you to have this life." "And Sarah? Would she approve of me?" "Sarah would have loved you," Daniel said with certainty. "She would have seen your strength immediately, probably would have insisted I rescue you even sooner." They fell into comfortable silence, the night sounds of the ranch surrounding them, horses nickering, night birds calling, the distant laughter of the hands in their quarters. It was a symphony of life, of community, of everything they'd built together. A rider approached on the main road moving fast. They both tensed from old habit, but it was just Jack Brennan returning from town with the mail. He swung by the house, tipping his hat. "Letter for you, Mrs. Hayes," he said, handing over an envelope. "From California." Eliza opened it, reading by the porch light. Her face went through several expressions before settling on wonder. "What is it?" Daniel asked. "It's from a publisher in San Francisco. They've heard about our school, about what we've built here. They want me to write a book about it, about education on the frontier, about building communities from nothing." "That's wonderful. You'll do it, of course." Eliza looked at the letter again, then at the ranch spread before them, then at her husband's proud face. "You know what? I think I will. But not just about education, about second chances, about how the worst things that happen to us can sometimes lead to the best." "What will you call it?" She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Coming with Me, a story of survival and grace." Daniel laughed. "Perfect. Though you might want to explain the title." "I'll start with a woman, shaved and shamed, huddled in a shack with nothing left to lose, and a rancher who rides up and says simply, 'You're coming with me.' And how those 4 words changed everything." "It's a good story," Daniel agreed. "The best kind. One that's true." As they headed inside, Eliza paused at the door, looking back at the night sky studded with stars. Somewhere out there, Samuel Coldwell sat in a prison cell, consumed by the hatred that had destroyed his life. His brothers would join him soon enough, their sentences extended for failed attempts to continue their vendetta from behind bars. But here, on the Double H Ranch, life flourished. Children learned and grew. Families found shelter and second chances. Love had built something lasting from the ashes of cruelty. The woman who'd once been shorn like a sheep, who'd been marked for shame and exile, had become the heart of an empire of compassion. She'd written her own story over the one the Coldwells had tried to force on her, and it was a story of triumph. "Coming?" Daniel called from inside. "Always," she replied, and followed him into their home. The next morning brought the usual chaos of a ranch awakening, children demanding breakfast, hands needing direction, 100 small decisions that kept the place running. But Eliza moved through it all with unusual purpose. She had a book to write, a story to tell. She set up a writing desk by the window in the library they'd built, overlooking the mountains. As she dipped her pen in ink and began to write, she could see young Thomas playing in the yard with his siblings, their laughter carrying on the morning breeze. "Chapter 1, she wrote, "The Worst Day." She paused, remembering that morning when Margaret Coldwell had arrived with those shears, when her world had collapsed into dust and shame. Then she continued writing, her hand steady and sure. The story poured out of her, not just her own tale, but the stories of everyone who'd found refuge at the Double H, the former slave who'd become their best horseman, the Chinese family who'd built a thriving garden that fed half the county, the widows and orphans who'd found not just shelter, but purpose and dignity. As she wrote, Daniel would sometimes stand in the doorway, watching her work with quiet pride. Esperanza would bring her tea and sit for a while, adding details Eliza had forgotten. Even the children contributed, young Thomas particularly interested in the parts about the bad man he barely remembered. 6 months later, the manuscript was complete. Eliza wrapped it carefully and sent it to San Francisco with a prayer and a hope. The response came faster than expected. They wanted to publish it immediately. More than that, they wanted her to come to the city for a series of lectures about frontier education and community building. "You should go," Daniel said immediately. "This is important." "Come with me," she said, echoing his words from so many years ago. So they went together, bringing the children to see the ocean for the first time. In San Francisco, Eliza stood before audiences of hundreds, telling her story with the same clear voice that had once confronted the Coldwells in a dusty street. She didn't hide what had been done to her. She showed them the silver streaks in her hair, told them about the shearing, about the shame that had been meant to destroy her. But more importantly, she told them about what came after, about Daniel's rescue, about the ranch that took in anyone who needed help, about children learning to read in a schoolhouse built from determination and donated lumber. The book was a sensation. Letters poured in from women across the country who'd faced their own Coldwells, who'd been marked for shame and told they were worthless. Eliza answered every one, telling them what Daniel had told her, that broken things, when mended properly, were often stronger than before. But fame wasn't what mattered. What mattered was coming home to the Double H, to the life they'd built. The ranch had grown in their absence, well managed by Miguel and Esperanza. New families had arrived, drawn by the book's story. The school had 3 teachers now. One evening, as Eliza was teaching her own children their letters by lamplight, young Thomas asked, "Mama, will you tell us the story again? About the rancher who saved you?" Sarah chimed in, "Please, Mama, the one where Papa was a hero." Eliza glanced at Daniel, who was pretending to read his newspaper but was clearly listening. "Your papa was a hero," she agreed. "But you want to know a secret? So was I." "You were?" James asked, wide-eyed. "The bravest kind of hero," Daniel said, setting aside his paper. "The kind who refuses to let evil win, even when it seems impossible to fight." Eliza gathered her children close, feeling the solid warmth of them, the miracle of their existence. "Once upon a time," she began, "there was a woman who thought she'd lost everything, but she learned that losing everything can sometimes mean finding who you really are." As she told the story, their story, she felt the truth of it settle into her bones. Every cruel act the Coldwells had committed had been transformed into fuel for something better. Their hatred had become her foundation for love. Their attempt to shame her had become her source of strength. The lamp burned low as the story continued, the children fighting sleep to hear the ending they knew by heart. How the rancher had said those 4 magical words, "You're coming with me." How the woman had found the courage to say yes. How they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of something ugly. When the children finally dozed off, Daniel carried them to bed one by one. Then he returned to find Eliza still sitting by the dying fire, lost in thought. "Where did you go?" he asked gently. "Just remembering. That first night here, I was so certain I didn't deserve this kindness, that I was too damaged, too broken to ever be whole again. And now?" She stood and went to him, wrapping her arms around his solid warmth. "Now I know that we're all broken somehow, but we're also all capable of healing, of growing, of becoming more than our worst moments." The years rolled forward like the seasons across the Nevada mountains, each one adding layers to the story that had begun with such cruelty and transformed into something magnificent. Young Thomas grew into a man who carried his mother's compassion and his father's strength, while Sarah and James brought their own gifts to the family legacy. The Double H Ranch had become more than just a successful enterprise. It had evolved into a beacon of hope for the entire territory. 20 years had passed since that terrible morning when the Coldwells had wielded their shears, and on this particular autumn day, Eliza stood in the cemetery behind the original Morton homestead. She'd bought the land back years ago, not to live there but to honor what had been. Thomas's grave stood neat and tended, fresh flowers placed there weekly by her own hand. "Hello, Thomas," she said quietly, as she always did during these visits. "Your nephew is getting married next week. Samuel's boy, the one Margaret asked me to help all those years ago. He's become a doctor. Can you imagine? He's nothing like his father." The wind rustled through the grass, and she pulled her shawl tighter. Her hair, now completely silver, caught the afternoon light. The streaks that had once marked her shame had spread until her entire head gleamed like moonlight, beautiful in its own way. Mrs. Hayes? She turned to find a young woman standing hesitantly at the cemetery gate. She was perhaps 25, with tired eyes and clothes that had been mended too many times. But it was what Eliza saw beneath the scarf wrapped around the woman's head that made her heart clench, the telltale unevenness of hair that had been forcibly cut. "Yes," Eliza said gently, already knowing why this woman had come. I heard about you, about what happened to you, about how you survived it." The woman's voice broke. "My husband's family, after he died in the mining accident last month, they said I was to blame, said I was a curse. She touched her covered head. "Come with me," Eliza said, the words coming as naturally as breathing. She held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the young woman took it. They rode back to the Double H in comfortable silence, the young woman, Ruth was her name, staring in wonder at the sprawling ranch, the children playing in the schoolyard, the obvious prosperity and peace of the place. "All this came from," Ruth started. "From refusing to let cruelty have the last word," Eliza finished, "from choosing to build rather than break." Daniel was on the porch when they arrived, his hair now white as fresh snow, but his bearing still strong. He took one look at Ruth and understood immediately. "Esperanza," he called, "we have a guest for dinner." Esperanza, now in her 70s but still formidable, emerged and immediately took charge of Ruth, whisking her away for a hot bath in fresh clothes. It was a dance they'd performed many times over the years, taking in the broken and beginning the slow work of healing. That evening, as the extended family and ranch hands gathered for dinner, Ruth sat in wonder at the long table. 3 generations now ate together, Daniel and Eliza at the heads, their children and grandchildren filling the sides, the ranch hands and their families creating a tapestry of faces that reflected the America that was emerging in this new century. Young Thomas, now grown with children of his own, raised a toast. "To second chances," he said, "and to those brave enough to offer them and accept them." As glasses clinked, Eliza caught Ruth's eye and smiled. The young woman's scarf had slipped, revealing the patchy stubble beneath, but no one stared or commented. Everyone at this table understood that scars were just evidence of survival. After dinner, Eliza took Ruth to the same room she'd been given all those years ago. It had been updated and refreshed, but it still held the same promise of safety and new beginnings. "How do you do it?" Ruth asked. "How do you go on when they've taken everything?" Eliza sat on the bed beside her, remembering asking the same question. You go on because stopping would mean they win. You go on because somewhere there's a life waiting for you that's bigger than the one they destroyed. And you go on because there are people who will help you, even when you can't help yourself. But the shame is what they gave you. It's not who you are. Eliza touched her own silver hair. These strands that marked my humiliation became my crown. Your scars will become your strength. I promise you that. Ruth began to cry then, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Eliza held her, remembering Esperanza holding her the same way, passing on the comfort that had been given to her. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A carriage arrived bearing the territorial governor and his wife, along with several other dignitaries. They'd come for the dedication of the Eliza Hayes Academy, the expanded school that now served students from across Nevada. "Mrs. Hayes," the governor said, taking her hand, "what you've built here is remarkable, an educational institution that rivals anything in San Francisco or Denver." "Education is just part of it," Eliza replied. "We're building citizens here, teaching them that strength and kindness aren't opposites but partners." The dedication ceremony was beautiful, with hundreds gathered to celebrate. Eliza stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, former students now grown with children of their own, ranch hands who'd learned to read in her evening classes, women who'd arrived broken and left whole. "When I first came to this valley," she began, her voice carrying clearly, "I had nothing but the clothes on my back and the kindness of strangers. I'd been marked for shame, told I was worthless, cast out like refuse. But I learned something important. We are not what others say we are. We are what we choose to become. In the crowd, she spotted several familiar faces. Margaret Coldwell, now in her 80s, sat in the front row. After her brother's imprisonments, she'd devoted her life to charity work, trying to atone for her family's cruelty. They'd never become friends, but they'd found a kind of peace. Jack Brennan was there with his family, his children grown and successful. He caught her eye and touched his hat brim, the same gesture of respect he'd offered that day when the Coldwells had tried to twist his kindness into something shameful. Even some of Samuel's children were present, the ones she'd helped educate despite everything their father had done. They'd grown into good people, proving that bloodlines didn't determine character. This academy, Eliza continued, stands as proof that from the worst moments can come the greatest triumphs. Every child who learns here, every woman who finds shelter here, every family that starts over here, they're all threads in a tapestry of redemption. After the ceremony, as people mingled and celebrated, Daniel found her standing alone by the old barn, not the original that had burned, but its replacement, now weathered by its own decades of service. "Proud of you," he said simply, as he always did. "We did this together," she replied, as she always did. "No," he said, more serious than usual. "You did this. I just gave you a place to start. Everything else, the school, the book, the way this ranch became a sanctuary, that was you." Before she could respond, a commotion arose from the main house. They hurried over to find a wagon arriving with a woman and 3 children. The woman was bruised, her children terrified, and Eliza recognized the look in her eyes, the same desperate hope she'd once carried. Without hesitation, Eliza stepped forward. "You're safe now," she said. "Whatever happened, whoever hurt you, they can't reach you here." The woman collapsed into tears of relief, and Esperanza's daughter Maria, who'd taken over much of her mother's role, immediately took charge, leading them inside. "How many is that now?" Daniel asked quietly. "I stopped counting at 100, Eliza replied. "Numbers don't matter. Each one matters." That evening, as the celebration continued into the night with music and dancing, Eliza found herself in her study, working on her latest book. This one was about the women who'd passed through the Double H, their stories of survival and triumph. Ruth knocked and entered, carrying tea. "Thank you," Ruth said, setting down the tray, "for everything." "You don't need to serve." "I want to. It helps to be useful." Ruth hesitated. "Can I ask you something? Do you ever think about what would have happened if that rancher, if Mr. Hayes, hadn't found you?" Eliza set down her pen and considered. I used to torment myself with what ifs, but then I realized something. Daniel didn't save me by accident. I believe we find the help we need when we need it most, even if we don't recognize it at first." "You really believe that?" "I do, because I've seen it happen too many times to be coincidence. Every woman who's found her way here, every child who's been given a second chance, they all arrived exactly when they needed to." Ruth touched her covered head self-consciously. "When will it stop hurting? The shame?" "It never fully goes away," Eliza said honestly, "but it transforms. What feels like a wound becomes a scar, then the scar becomes a story, and the story becomes strength. One day you'll tell someone else what you survived, and they'll find hope in your healing." As Ruth left, Eliza returned to her writing. The house was full of music and laughter, the sounds of a community that had grown from seeds of sorrow. Through her window, she could see couples dancing in the yard, lanterns strung between the trees creating pools of golden light. Daniel appeared in the doorway. "There's someone here to see you." She followed him outside to find an elderly man she didn't recognize, weathered and bent but with keen eyes. He held his hat in gnarled hands. "Mrs. Hayes, you won't remember me. Name's Weber, Herman Weber. I was the one who drove past that day, when the Coldwells—" Eliza's breath caught. She did remember, the wagon that had rolled by without stopping, the man who'd looked away from her humiliation. "I've carried that shame for 20 years, he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "I was a coward. I saw what they were doing and I did nothing. I've come to apologize, though I know it's far too late." "It's never too late," Eliza said softly. "You were afraid. They'd cultivated that fear for years. You don't understand. My own wife, back in the old country, she suffered something similar. I promised myself when I came to America that I'd never let such things happen again. But when the moment came, I failed. Eliza reached out and took his weathered hands in hers. You're here now. That matters. I've brought something, he said, pulling out an envelope. It's not much, but I want to donate it to your school for the children who need second chances. The envelope contained a bank draft for a substantial sum, likely the man's life savings. Eliza tried to refuse, but he insisted. Please, he said, let me be part of something good. Let me help build instead of just standing by. After he left, Daniel found her crying on the porch. What's wrong? Nothing's wrong, she said through her tears. It's just… The ripples never stop, do they? One act of cruelty, one act of kindness, they both keep spreading, touching lives we'll never even know about. As the evening wound down and guests began departing, Eliza walked through her domain, for that's what it had become, though she'd never sought it. The academy buildings, the dormitories for women seeking shelter, the expanded ranch operations, the library she'd built in memory of Thomas, her first husband who'd loved books even if he couldn't stand up to his family. In the children's dormitory, she found Ruth reading to some of the younger residents, her scarf forgotten, her patchy hair exposed but her voice strong and warm. The children didn't care about her appearance. They were lost in the story she was telling. And then the brave princess said, I don't need a crown of gold. My crown is made of survival, Ruth read, and Eliza recognized her own words from her first book. She moved on to the main house, where her grandchildren were pleading with Daniel for one more story before bed. He was telling them about the night of the fire, when their grandmother had stood on a roof with baby Thomas in her arms, ready to fight the world to protect him. Was Grandma scared? Little Emily asked. Probably, Daniel said. But being scared doesn't mean you're not brave. Your grandmother taught me that. Eliza climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the same room where she'd first barricaded herself against Samuel Coldwell's axe. The door had been replaced long ago, but she could still see the marks in the frame where the blade had bitten deep. She stood at the window, looking out at the empire of compassion they'd built. Lights glowed in windows across the ranch, each one representing a life touched, a family sheltered, a future made possible. Any regrets? Daniel asked, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. How could I regret the path that led me here, she replied. Every terrible thing, every moment of despair, they were all steps toward this. Even the shearing? Especially that. They tried to mark me with shame, but instead they freed me from fear. After you've lost everything and survived, what's left to be afraid of? A knock at the door interrupted them. It was Maria, Esperanza's daughter. Senora, there's been word from the prison. Samuel Coldwell is dying. He's asking to see you. Eliza felt Daniel tense behind her. You don't have to go, he said. I know. She turned to face him. But I think I should, to close that chapter completely. The next morning, she made the journey to the state prison, a fortress of stone and iron that seemed to embody all the coldness of the world. Samuel Coldwell lay in the prison infirmary, a shadow of the man who'd terrorized her. Age and illness had worn him down to bones and bitterness. Come to gloat? He wheezed when he saw her. No, she said, sitting in the chair beside his bed. I came because you asked. He studied her, taking in the silver hair, the fine clothes, the evident health and prosperity. You won. Everything I tried to take from you, you got back tenfold. This was never about winning or losing, Samuel. It was about choosing who we wanted to be. I chose family. I chose loyalty. You chose hatred. There's a difference. He was quiet for a long moment, his labored breathing the only sound. Then, my children, I heard you helped them, even after everything. They weren't responsible for your choices. Margaret says they're all successful. The boy's a doctor, the girl's a teacher. He laughed bitterly. They became everything I tried to prevent you from being. Children have a way of becoming themselves despite our efforts to shape them. Why? He asked suddenly, genuine confusion in his voice. Why help them? Why not let the Coldwell name die in shame? Eliza thought carefully before answering. Because shame isn't inherited. Because cruelty doesn't have to echo through generations. Because someone showed me kindness when I deserved it least, and I learned that's when kindness matters most. Samuel closed his eyes. I've hated you for 20 years. Blamed you for everything, the ranch failing, the family falling apart, ending up here. I know. Doesn't it bother you? Your hatred hurt me once. Now it just makes me sad. You've wasted your entire life on bitterness when you could have chosen differently at any point. Easy for you to say from your high horse. No, she said firmly. It wasn't easy. Choosing forgiveness over revenge, building instead of destroying, opening my heart when it wanted to close, none of it was easy. But it was worth it. Samuel opened his eyes and really looked at her for perhaps the first time. That day, with the shears, Margaret was the one who insisted on it. I just went along. You all made your choices. Do you forgive me? The question seemed to surprise him as much as her. Eliza considered. I forgive the pain you caused me, because holding on to it would only hurt me more. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You're dying in prison because of choices you made. That's justice, not vengeance. He nodded slowly. The preacher says I should make peace before I go. Then make it, but make it for yourself, not for me. I found my peace long ago. As she stood to leave, he called out weakly, Eliza. She turned back. Tell my children, tell them I'm sorry for everything. Tell them yourself. Write them a letter. They deserve to hear it from you, not through me. She left him there, knowing she'd never see him again. On the ride home, she felt lighter somehow, as if a chain she hadn't known she was still carrying had finally been broken. The ranch was buzzing with activity when she returned. The autumn cattle drive was preparing to depart, and young Thomas, not so young anymore at 23, was leading it for the first time. He sat his horse like his father, tall and confident, but his eyes held his mother's compassion. How did it go, Mama? He asked, riding over to her. It's finished, she said simply. The past is truly past now. That evening, the family gathered for what had become a tradition, Sunday dinner with everyone, from the newest hired hand to the oldest resident. The table had been extended multiple times over the years, now stretching the entire length of the great room. Ruth stood to make an announcement, her hair now grown out to a short but becoming length. I've been accepted to the Teachers' College in San Francisco. Mrs. Hayes's recommendation letter made the difference. Everyone applauded, and Eliza felt the familiar warmth of seeing another life transformed. Ruth would go on to teach, probably help other women as she'd been helped, the ripples continuing ever outward. After dinner, as the sun set behind the mountains in a blaze of color, Eliza found herself surrounded by her grandchildren, all clamoring for the story. The story, the one they never tired of hearing. Tell us about when Papa found you, Emily demanded. Tell us about the bad men, her brother added. Tell us about being brave, the youngest piped up. So Eliza gathered them close and began the tale again, but this time she told it differently. This time she didn't focus on the cruelty or the shame or the fear. This time she told them about the courage of ordinary people choosing to help, about the power of kindness to transform lives, about how the worst moments could become the foundation for the best ones. You see, she said as the story wound toward its end, the rancher who said, "You're coming with me," didn't just save one person. He started something that would save hundreds. Every person who's found shelter here, every child who's learned to read in our school, every woman who's discovered she's stronger than she knew, they're all part of that moment when someone chose compassion over indifference. Will we be part of it too? Emily asked. You already are, Eliza assured her. Every time you choose kindness over cruelty, every time you help instead of hurt, every time you stand up for someone who can't stand alone, you're continuing the story. As the children were led off to bed, Daniel sat beside her in the gathering darkness. You tell it differently now, he observed. The story changes as we change, she replied. When I first told it, it was about survival. Then it became about justice. Now it's about legacy. And what legacy is that? She gestured to the ranch spread before them, lights beginning to twinkle in windows like earthbound stars. That cruelty doesn't get the last word. That shame can be transformed into strength. That one act of kindness can echo through generations. A rider approached in the darkness, a young woman leading a small group. Even in the dim light, Eliza could see the telltale signs, the haunted eyes, the protective way the women clustered together, the children clinging to their mothers' skirts. Without hesitation, Eliza rose and walked toward them. "Welcome," she called out. "You're safe here." The lead woman dismounted, tears streaming down her face. We heard this was a place where second chances begin," Eliza finished. "Yes, come inside. Esperanza will have food ready, and will find you rooms." As she led them toward the house, the woman caught her arm. "Is it true? What they say about you? That you survived something terrible and built all this?" Eliza touched her silver hair, thinking of the morning it had been shorn away, of the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. "Yes, it's true, but I didn't build it alone. I had help. And now, so do you." The woman began to sob, relief and exhaustion overwhelming her. Eliza held her, this stranger who wasn't really a stranger at all, but another version of herself from years ago, another soul marked for shame but refusing to surrender to it. "What's your name?" Eliza asked gently. Mary Sullivan." "Well, Mary Sullivan, you're home now, for as long as you need." As she led the group inside, Eliza caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back bore little resemblance to the shorn, desperate creature Daniel had found in that shack. This woman stood tall, silver hair gleaming like a crown, eyes filled with purpose and peace. But they were the same woman, separated only by time and the transformative power of kindness. Every gray strand was a reminder of the journey, every line on her face a map of the territory between despair and hope. Daniel appeared beside her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. "More souls to save?" "More souls to help save themselves," she corrected. "We just provide the opportunity. You know the county commissioners want to name the new town after you. Eliza's Grace, they're calling it." She laughed softly. "Tell them to name it Second Chance. That's what it really is." That night, as she lay in bed listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into sleep, new voices added to the familiar chorus, Eliza thought about the woman she'd been that terrible morning when the Coldwells came with their shears and their hatred. That woman had thought her life was ending. She'd been right, in a way. That life had ended. But from its ashes had risen something extraordinary, not just a new life for herself, but new lives for countless others. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the silver strands of her hair spread across the pillow. Daniel reached over and wound a strand around his finger, a gesture of tenderness that still, after all these years, made her heart skip. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about circles and straight lines," she said. The Coldwells thought they were drawing a straight line, from shame to exile to disappearance. But life doesn't work in straight lines. It works in circles. The shame they tried to give me became the strength I used to help others. The exile they forced on me led me to you. The disappearance they wanted became a presence larger than they could have imagined. And now Samuel is dying in prison while you're building towns. That's not victory, Daniel. It's just sad. All that energy he put into hatred, imagine what he could have built with it instead. Not everyone chooses building over breaking. "No," she agreed, "but enough do. Enough to matter." The next morning brought news. Samuel Coldwell had died in the night. Eliza felt neither joy nor sorrow, just a quiet closing of a chapter that had been ending for years. She wrote letters to his children, letting them know she'd seen him, that he'd expressed regret, that they should remember whatever good they could find in their memories of him. At breakfast, young Thomas made an announcement. "I've been accepted to law school in Boston." The table erupted in congratulations, but Eliza saw the worry in his eyes. "It's wonderful, son. You'll make a fine lawyer." "But the ranch—" "Will be here when you get back," Daniel said firmly, "and will benefit from having a lawyer in the family." "I want to use the law to help people," Thomas said, "the way you've used the ranch. I want to make sure no one can do what the Coldwells did ever again." Later, as Eliza walked through the school, checking on classes, she found Ruth teaching the youngest children. On the board, she'd written, "We are not what others say we are. We are what we choose to become." So that's from your book," Ruth said, noticing her in the doorway. "It's from life," Eliza replied. "The book just captured it." That afternoon, a telegram arrived that would change everything once again. The President of the United States was coming to Nevada, and he wanted to visit the Double H Ranch, having heard about its work with rehabilitation and education. The President, Daniel said, stunned. Here. Should we prepare something special? Esperanza asked. No, Eliza said firmly. He should see us as we are. That's what makes this place special. Not ceremony, but authenticity. 2 weeks later, the presidential train pulled into the nearest station, and a procession of carriages made its way to the ranch. President Theodore Roosevelt, energetic and enthusiastic, bounded from his carriage almost before it stopped moving. Mrs. Hayes, he boomed, taking her hand in both of his. I've read your books. Extraordinary work you've done here. Mr. President, she replied with a slight curtsy that made him laugh. None of that. I'm here to learn from you, not the other way around. He toured the ranch with genuine interest, talking to the students, meeting the women in residence, examining the innovative irrigation systems Daniel had designed. But what seemed to move him most was the simple dignity of the place, the way everyone was treated as valuable regardless of their past. At dinner, seated at the same long table where everyone from ranch hands to refugees ate together, the president raised his glass. I've seen many things in my travels, he said, but rarely have I seen such a pure example of the American ideal. This ranch, this school, this community, this is what we should aspire to. Not just success, but significance. Not just prosperity, but purpose. After dinner, he asked to speak with Eliza privately. They walked together toward the old barn, the president's security detail maintaining a discreet distance. I want to offer you a position, he said. In Washington, leading a national initiative on education and rehabilitation. What you've done here could be done everywhere. Eliza looked out over the ranch, at the lights beginning to glow in windows, at the mountains standing eternal guard. This is my place, Mr. President. These are my people. What we've built here can't be replicated from an office in Washington. It has to grow from the ground up, one person helping another, one community at a time. You could help thousands. I am helping thousands. Every person who leaves here whole helps others. Every teacher we train spreads what they've learned. Every book I write carries the message further. She smiled. Besides, I'm exactly where I need to be. Roosevelt nodded, understanding. Then let me at least help from Washington. Federal funding for schools like yours. Protection for women fleeing abuse. Laws preventing what happened to you from happening to others. That, Eliza said, I would gratefully accept. As the president's party prepared to leave the next morning, he took both Eliza's hands in his. You know what strikes me most about your story? It's not the cruelty you survived or even the empire you've built. It's that you didn't let bitterness poison the well. You transformed your pain into purpose. After he left, life at the ranch returned to its rhythm, though now with the promise of federal support and national recognition. Letters poured in from around the country, from women who'd read about the president's visit, asking for help, for advice, for hope. Eliza answered everyone, often late into the night, her silver hair gleaming in the lamplight as she wrote. Daniel would find her there, surrounded by papers, and bring her tea, sitting with her in comfortable silence. One night, as winter approached and the first snow dusted the mountains, he asked, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken the president's offer? No, she said without hesitation. This is where I belong. This is where that scared, shorn woman in the shack was meant to end up. Every path led here. Even the painful ones? Especially those. The easy paths rarely lead anywhere worth going. A knock at the door interrupted them. Maria entered with a baby in her arms. Not her own, but a foundling left at the ranch gate with a note. Please help. I can't. Eliza took the baby, a girl with wisps of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. Hello, little one, she whispered. You're safe now. Another soul for the ranch, Daniel said softly. Another chance for the world to get it right, Eliza corrected. As she held the baby, she thought about all the children who'd passed through these walls, all the women who'd arrived broken and left whole, all the families that had begun again under this roof. Each one a refutation of the Coldwell's cruelty, each one proof that kindness was stronger than hatred. The baby grasped her finger with surprising strength, and Eliza smiled. You're coming with me, she whispered to the child, echoing the words that had saved her all those years ago. You're coming with us into a future where your past doesn't define you, where shame has no power, where second chances are not just possible but promised. Outside, snow began to fall in earnest, blanketing the ranch in pristine white, covering the scars of old battles and old pain. But beneath that snow, the earth waited, patient and fertile, ready to bloom again when spring came. Just like the human heart, Eliza thought, always ready to grow again, no matter how harsh the winter. She stood carefully, still holding the baby, and walked to the window. The double H spread before her, larger than ever, lights glowing warmly against the snow. Somewhere out there, more women were struggling, more children were in need, more souls were searching for second chances. We'll be ready for them, she said softly, knowing Daniel was listening. However many come, however broken they are, we'll be ready. You can't save everyone, he said gently. No, she agreed, turning to face him, the baby peaceful in her arms. But we can save everyone who finds their way here. And they'll save others. And on it goes, ripples in a pond that never stops spreading. As the night deepened and the snow continued to fall, Eliza Hayes stood in the home built from the ashes of her humiliation, holding a baby who would grow up knowing only love and possibility. The woman who'd been shorn like a sheep had become a shepherd. The one marked for shame had become a beacon of hope. And in the quiet of that winter night, with her husband beside her and a new life in her arms, she knew with absolute certainty that every moment of pain had been worth it for this. This life, this purpose, this proof that humans could choose to lift each other up instead of tearing each other down.